Hello and welcome from our studios near Washington, D.C. for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Advisory Committee meeting of November 12th and November 13th, which is being held virtually. In a moment, we'll join the meeting in progress, but before we do that, just a quick housekeeping point. If you do have any technical issues, there is a tech support button above the video player on the same site. Feel free to click on that, and they're standing by both phone and email if you have any questions. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the chair, Tom McDonald, Chairman of the Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Advisory Committee. Tom?
Well, good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to the second virtual meeting of EPA's Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Committee. My name is Tom McDonald. I'm Senior Vice President of Environmental Affairs and Sustainability for Five Rivers Ranch Cattle Feeding and Chairman of the FRRCC. Thank you for joining us today. Our first order of business is a roll call of the committee members, and I will call each committee member's name and allow them to tell of their affiliation. So our first member, Michael Arts.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Hi, Tom. Yeah, this is Mike Arts with Florida Fruit and Vegetable Association and also representing the Minor Crop Farmer Alliance.
Thanks, Michael. Barry Berg.
Present. Good morning, everyone. Barry Berg from Brookings, South Dakota, and I'm representing local government agencies.
Great. Emily Broadleib. Emily is not with us this morning.
I'm so sorry, Tom. Can you hear me okay? My apologies.
I can hear you now.
was having a little bit of technical challenges. So I'm here. This is Emily Broadleib, and I'm with the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Commissioner Don Brown.
Don Brown from Yuma, Colorado. How's everybody doing this morning? Farmer and rancher and former Colorado Commissioner of Agriculture.
Thanks, Don. Jamie Burr.
Thank you, Tom. Present. I represent Tyson Foods. I've been with Tyson for a little over 20 years.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Philip Chavez.
I'm here. Good morning. I represent the Lower Arkansas River Conservancy District and also an alfalfa and hemp farmer here in Colorado and Arizona.
Thanks, Philip. John Collison.
Good morning. John Collison, Black Oak Farms, Duvall, Oklahoma, also representing the Oklahoma Rural Association.
Great. Bill Kauser.
Bill Kauser, Nevada, Iowa Kauser Cattle Company. I'm a farmer, a cattle feeder, and I'm here representing livestock, ethanol, soil health, and water quality.
Thanks, Bill. Michael Crowder.
I'm here, President-elect for the National Association of Conservation Districts, and I reside in West Richland, Washington State.
Thanks, Michael. Matt Frond.
I'm from Canaan, Connecticut, and I'm representing dairy farms as well as vegetable farms.
Thanks, Matt. Sharon Furches.
Yes, good morning. I'm Sharon Furches. I live down in Murray, Kentucky, far western Kentucky. I represent Kentucky Farm Bureau and my own grain operation of Furches Farms Partnership.
Thanks, Sharon. Dr. Jeff Gore.
Present, and thank you. I'm a research and extension professor with Mississippi State University representing academia.
Thanks, Jeff. David Graybill.
Present. I'm Dave Graybill from Mifflintown, Pennsylvania. Own and operate Red Sunset Farms, a small dairy farm, and keep a few bees. Also a member of Pennsylvania Farm Bureau State Board.
Thanks, Dave. Alex Johns.
Alex Johns here, Okeechobee, Florida, representing the Seminole Tribe of Florida.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate you being with us today. Jimmy Kinder.
Yes, from Southwest Oklahoma, farmer rancher. I'm representing rural interest from Oklahoma from the Oklahoma Farm Bureau viewpoint.
Thanks, Jimmy. Jeanette Lombardo.
Good morning. I'm Jeanette Lombardo with the Farmer Veteran Coalition out here in California. I also do work with Global Water Innovations.
Thanks, Jeanette. And the Vice Chairman of the FRRCC, Ms. Lauren Lurkins.
Good morning. I'm present. This is Lauren Lurkins. I represent the Illinois Farm Bureau. I am their Director of Environmental Policy. Good morning.
Good morning, Lauren. Thank you. Gary Mahaney. Gary, are you on mute? Okay, I'm not seeing Gary, so we'll go on to Mr. Nick McCarthy.
Good morning, everyone. Nick McCarthy, present from York, Nebraska. I work for Central Valley Ag Cooperative, and I represent the 15,000 member owners that are farmers and ranchers through our 3-state area of Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa.
Thanks, Nick. Jesse McCurry.
Yes, sir. Good morning. I'm present. I am Jesse McCurry, Executive Director with the Kansas Grain Sorghum Producers.
Thanks, Jesse. Jay Olson.
Welcome. Thank you. I'm Jay Olson. I work for the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food, and I represent local governments.
Great. Thanks, Jay. Chris Pettit.
Good morning, Tom. Chris Pettit from the great state of Florida. I run the Office of Agricultural Water Policy for the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, representing state agencies.
Thanks, Chris. Bill Pratt.
Morning, Bill Pratt, farmer and rancher from Westphalia, Kansas, also CEO of East Kansas Agri-Energy and Ethanol Plant in Garnett, representing agriculture and ethanol industry.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Dr. Graciela Ramirez Toro.
Good morning. I'm Graciela Ramirez Toro. I work at Interamerican University of Puerto Rico, directing the Center for Environmental Education, Conservation, and Research, and I represent academia in the committee.
Great. Thank you, Graciela. Dr. Charles Santerre.
Good morning, Tom. President. I'm Charlie Santerre from Purdue University, and I represent academia.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Beth Sauerhaft.
Good morning, Tom. I'm here in metropolitan New York State and representing the American Farmland Trust, where I'm the Vice President of Programs, representing NGOs and environmental and ag NGOs.
Great. Thanks, Beth. Stacy Smith. I don't think Stacy was going to be able to join us today, but I wanted to give him a chance to answer if he was on. Mr. Davey Stevens.
Yes, good morning, Tom. Davey Stevens from Clinton, Kentucky, represent the American Soybean Association as chairman. From Clinton, Kentucky, soybeans, corn, and raised poultry.
Thanks, Davey. Secretary Jeff Whitty.
Good morning. Jeff Whitty, I serve as New Mexico Secretary of Agriculture.
Thanks, Jeff. Amy Wolf.
Good morning, everyone, from Modesto, California. My name is Amy Wolf, and I am the President and CEO Emeritus of AgSafe, representing agricultural nonprofit organizations on the committee.
Great. Thanks, Amy. And Jim Zook. Jim, are you with us this morning? Are you on mute? Okay, I'm not hearing from Jim. Thank you all for being here today. At this time, we do have a quorum, so I will officially call to order the EPA Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Committee meeting. And at this time, I will invite Rebecca Perrin the designated federal officer for the FRRCC, to give us a few procedural remarks.
Thank you, Chairman McDonald. Even though this is a virtual meeting, I wanted to remind everyone that this meeting is open to the public per FACA requirements. While all sessions of this meeting are open to the public, only the Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Committee members and speakers will be able to converse, collaborate, and otherwise work today and tomorrow. Additional details about the mission of this committee and the charge topics or the committee members can be viewed on the Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Committee webpage at www.epa.gov/FACA/FRRCC. The plan is to close our meetings no later than 5 p.m. Eastern on both days. We will hear public comment from the one registered member of the public today. There will be no public comment at the end of tomorrow's meeting. Members of the public interested in providing feedback to the committee regarding this meeting can submit written comments to frrcc@epa.gov. Again, that's frrcc@epa.gov until 11:59 p.m. on Friday, November 13th, 2020, so tomorrow. As is our standard practice, in order to be consistent with government-wide FACA final rules, the summary from this meeting will be available on the FRRCC website within 90 days of the end of this meeting. Members of the press attending today, if you need any additional information, please reach out to EPA at press@epa.gov. We'd be happy to assist you. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Rebecca. At this time, it's my honor to invite Carrie Meadows, the Ag Advisor to the EPA Administrator, to give her opening remarks.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everyone. And thank you all for joining us for the second meeting of the Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Committee meeting. As the Agricultural Advisor to Administrator Wheeler, I serve as a primary advocate and liaison for U.S. agriculture here at EPA. As part of my role, I am honored to work with the FRRCC as you report your policy advice and recommendations to Administrator Wheeler. We know farmers and ranchers are the original stewards of the land, and you should be some of EPA's strongest allies. The Trump administration has worked hard to recognize and prioritize this partnership. In fact, it is one of the reasons we revived this committee. We know that your input and advice to the agency is incredibly valuable. Administrator Wheeler wants EPA to work together with agriculture as a partner in environmental stewardship, while at the same time, we also need to better understand how agriculture already provides environmental benefits, many that you may not be getting credit for. The conversations and presentations that will be heard over this meeting's duration are a direct result of Administrator Wheeler's charge that he introduced this committee back in September. His charge noted that American farmers and ranchers are responsible for providing food and fiber to the world and are expected to increase yields for a growing population with less resources. Advancements in agricultural innovations, including crop protection tools, biotechnology, precision enhancements in the use of fertilizer and water, and preventing waste are vital for producers to hit these growing production goals. These topics were selected after careful consideration and will provide valuable information on issues that are a shared priority for both EPA and rural America. The first charge to the committee is to look into creating a holistic pesticide program for the future. How can EPA reduce barriers for American agriculture to continue to feed the world with less resources through these innovations in crop protection? How can we better communicate with the American public and our international trading partners about the agency's holistic approach to pesticide management and improve the availability of information about our science-based process? How does encouraging and facilitating technologies and practices like new active ingredients, plant-incorporated protectants, biotechnology, and integrated pest management plans advance this mission. The second charge is supporting interagency environmental benchmarks with interagency partners. Particularly when looking at this topic, we were talking about water quality and quantity and food loss and waste. How can EPA facilitate the development of new technologies, practices, or market-based approaches to advanced environmental goals around nutrient pollution, water reuse, and food loss and waste? How can EPA coordinate with other agencies to better measure data and information regarding proactive measures that production agriculture and rural communities take? Utilize or coordinate data from state, local, tribal, or federal partners? How can EPA leverage existing EPA programs and support agriculture and rural America's efforts in these areas? I view, and the administrator views, this committee as a critical platform for ensuring that rural America has a seat at the table on issues that impact your everyday lives. Again, I'm excited to welcome everyone to the second meeting. I know that the committee work groups have been discussing these issues, and their discussions are reflected in the speakers we'll be hearing from over the next 2 days. I look forward to listening in on these presentations and the conversations. Thank you to the members of the public who are joining us. As a reminder, your input is very valuable to the work the committee is doing. So if you would like to provide public comments, you may still do that. You may provide written comments until 11:59 Eastern tomorrow, November 13th. And you may submit those comments at frrcc@epa.gov. These comments will help ensure committee members are hearing from other impacted stakeholders as the committee works to develop their advice and recommendations to the administrator. Again, thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to the committee members for your service. And I'll turn it back over to Tom for the remainder of the program. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Carrie. We appreciate your representation of agriculture to the administrator and to EPA. Thank you for all that you do. Well, after our September meeting, we formed 3 ad hoc work groups to focus on the pesticide, water quality and quantity, and food loss and waste charge topics. Lauren Larkins is chairing the pesticide ad hoc work group. Jamie Burr is chair of the water quality and quantity work group. And Matt Frond is chairing the food loss and waste work group. Over the next 2 days, we will explore the charge topics further by learning what policies, projects, and processes are currently in use by EPA and other partners, both within the federal family and in the private sector. I have asked each work group chair to provide a brief status update, and then we will have 2 presentations from experts in each charge topic area, followed by a question and answer session, and finally the full committee discussion on the charge topics associated with each work group. To date, our discussions have centered around clarifying questions, information needs, and the scope of our responses. However, it's important that we advance to more substantive deliberations in an effort to stay on track and progress towards our policy advice for EPA administrator. I have developed the following work plan and timeline. It's important that we chart a course with milestones for the next 14 months. It seems like we should have a lot longer than that, but our time is short. We plan to have 2 full committee meetings next year, 1 in spring and 1 in fall, with the possibility of an additional virtual meeting if needed. So from a calendar timeline standpoint, by December the 15th, of this year, EPA will provide a SharePoint site or similar file sharing site to allow work groups to gather information and edit their work product. By March the 1st of next year, 2021, each ad hoc work group should have all of their advice issues identified and at least one advice letter in draft form, so we can have full committee deliberations at the spring meeting. So that is all of the issues around which you would expect to provide advice should be identified and maybe prioritized. And then one draft advice letter so that we can deliberate that at the full committee meeting. Then by July 1st of 2021, each ad hoc work group should have all advice letters in draft form. By September the 1st, each ad hoc work group should have all of their advice letters prepared for committee deliberation and adoption at the fall full committee meeting. And then either in December or January of December 2021 or January 2022, the FRRCC policy advice will be presented to the EPA administrator. Now, obviously, this work plan and timeline is dynamic and may need to be tweaked, but it's important that we have a timeline against which to measure our progress. The FRRCC is comprised of 32 individuals, and each of you have unique expertise and unique experiences. You represent a demographic of farms, ranches, and rural communities that are counting on your voice to be heard. As we deliberate the next couple of days, ask yourself, what advice do I need to give EPA about pesticides, water quality and quantity, and food loss and waste? And I look forward to the next 2 days of discussions. And with that, let's get started with our first work group report out. And that will be Jamie Burr, Chair of the Water Ad Hoc Work Group. Jamie, are you on?
Sir, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get started, there's a few thank yous I would like to issue. First, yesterday our country celebrated Veterans Day. And I would like to thank all the veterans on this line and across this country, across this world that has served our country. Secondly, I'd like to thank our designated federal officers. Hema handed off to Rebecca in a really good shape, this work product, in my opinion. And Rebecca, I sincerely wanted to thank you for keeping us in line, for being so helpful, so resourceful, and so collaborative. So thank you for that. And then lastly, I'd like to thank the members of the ad hoc committee, or I shouldn't say committee, the ad hoc work group. We have had great discussion. We've had good debate, and I think the full committee will see that we've made some progress on making some recommendations on how we move forward. We've had 2 meetings as a work group. Our first meeting, we had a lot of reintroduction to each other, learning each other and learning more about backgrounds. Discussion of the charge, we discussed more of the charge, and we developed more questions as our chairman discussed earlier. Second, we have developed a list of priorities that I would like to share with the full committee. Would like later to get input to make sure the committee agrees with the priorities that we will lay forward. So first, I'll start with just introducing the topics, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman, and then we can discuss in more detail later as we have time.
Sure.
So there are 5 areas that we would like to concentrate on in this order. First is to develop a water quality trading framework. We want to encourage EPA to do so and to ensure that we include Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act implications of a trading framework. Second, we want to encourage a collaboration with EPA, USDA, FDA, and other state environmental agencies on water reuse. You'll see from our agenda today, we have two speakers, both to address these two topics and to get us started and begin getting our minds around these two first topics. The third is we want to evaluate the use of voluntary efforts to provide certainty to farmers. And there's a lot in that we can discuss later that the ad hoc group has discussed. Fourth, we want to address impaired waters. And then again, when we get to the later part of the discussion, we'll talk more about that, and I'll tell you more about the conversation that the committee has had on both topics 3 and 4. And then fifth, we want to provide input to EPA on carbon sequestration and soil health as it relates to water quality and water quantity. With that, Mr. Chairman, that's my report out. I will turn it over to you to introduce our next speaker or entertain any questions with the time that we may have.
We do have a little bit of time before our next speaker is slotted to be on. Are there any questions for Jamie or the water work group?
So Jamie, this is Jeanette.
Yes, ma'am.
So the order you presented, the priorities, is that the order of importance or how we're going to go after them, or talk about that later?
Well, sir, that's the order we discussed in the ad hoc committee to work on these topics. To start from top to bottom, so to speak.
I think questions like that are important questions. If you're not on the water ad hoc work group, feel free to ask any of those kinds of clarifying questions. The ad hoc work groups don't provide the advice. They do the legwork and they do the initial drafting of the advice letters, but it's the full work group that has to approve the advice that is presented to EPA. So during our time this next 2 days, please feel free to ask those kinds of clarifying questions and understand how the work groups are approaching the subject areas so that you're more comfortable with the direction that the committee is going. Any other questions for Jamie? If not, do we have Anna Wildeman on the line? Is Anna ready?
Tom, I'm checking on that real quick. This is
okay.
Rebecca.
Well, while we're waiting to see if Anna is available, Jamie, do you want to give us a little more discussion or a little more color around the water quality trading framework that the work group has had? What do you envision in that area?
Great question. So the discussion that we have had is to encourage EPA to develop a framework and provide guidance to the states on developing a framework nationwide that would address items that could come up in water quality trading with downstream states, for instance. That includes individual states' rights. That includes how the NPDES program, National Pollution Discharge Elimination Systems program, would consider nutrient trading for permit holders, how trades could be developed, what would be the ratio of the trade, for instance. Those are a few of the things, Tom, that we have discussed. And I'd be happy for anyone on the ad hoc committee to add to that. I do want to say also, we want to make sure that we include all implications of water regulations in this framework, to include the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, for instance.
Right.
Jamie, this is Chris. You mind if I hop in on some of the Florida issues that we discussed a little bit?
Please do.
Excellent. Mr. Chair, we just, we in Florida have had, we went through a water quality trading effort, got some legislation in statute, I don't know, about a decade ago now, and we've been part of the discussion, and we're working to get some input regarding how the successes and some of the challenges that resulted from that framework. And one of the things that we wanted to illustrate, and an effort that we're working on now, is within these market-based mechanisms, not only looking at the water quality credit trading, but also starting to talk about some of the environmental services pieces, the public goods pieces, the way in which once you've got that floor set, you look at what is possible on the landscape over and above the conservation gains that are available within, say, the best management practices programs. We obviously are impacted as one of the downstream users on the transboundary type issues. We felt that was very, very important, but we also wanted to kind of expand a bit beyond just the traditional water quality credit trading to some of those more nuanced market mechanisms that can also play a positive role as we work through the water quality challenges that we face.
Thanks, Chris. I think that's good discussion. I know that the water quality trading has had some areas where that's been a focus, but probably for the vast majority of the United States, this is a new concept and something that we all kind of need to get our minds around and what that looks like and how that works.
Mr. Chairman, it looked like Rebecca was trying to say something.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. Our next presenter is Anna Wildeman, and she is the Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Water, where she manages work on major rulemaking efforts and leads the nutrient reduction strategy. Anna is an environmental and regulatory attorney who specializes in state and federal environmental law and policy. Prior to joining EPA, Anna served as the director of the Environmental Protection Unit at the Wisconsin Department of Justice and was policy counsel and executive to the Environment and Agriculture Committee at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington, D.C. Anna, we welcome you to our meeting today, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Sorry that my video screen is a little odd here on a laptop in basically a hotel room. So hopefully this works out okay.
You look good. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for letting me be here today. I want to, obviously thank Tom, Rebecca, Carrie, and others who helped put this together and helped make it happen. I also really want to, commend you guys for recognizing the importance of water when it comes to agriculture. I mean, obviously, we can't grow, nor can we eat food without clean and safe water. So I'm pleased to see that it's so prominent in your meeting agenda, and I hope that you all have great conversations. This morning, I'm going to provide an overview and an update on EPA's efforts to promote water quality trading to reduce excess nutrients in our nation's waters. This session, and also the water reuse session, both relate to the water charges for this committee, and hopefully will be helpful to the afternoon discussion. So under this administration, EPA is really focusing its attention on reducing excess nutrients in the nation's waters through an all-of-the-above approach. These efforts include enhanced federal and state coordination, stakeholder engagement, and promoting market-based and other collaborative approaches to water quality improvements. Examples include providing grant funding through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and farmer-to-farmer cooperative agreements, hosting an innovative nutrient financing webinar series and national forum, co-chairing the hypoxia task force, and of course, every effort that we can to advance market-based approaches generally and water quality trading specifically as it relates to that NPDES permit program. So before diving into detail on our actions to advance trading and other market-based approaches, it's important to understand why trading is essential to making further progress. For decades, EPA has worked to ratchet down point source discharges of nutrients through our Clean Water Act regulatory programs. And as a result of our great success, our investments, our effort, in many cases, the next incremental reduction of nutrients from a brick and mortar treatment facility is likely to be pretty expensive. That means that the most significant and the most cost-effective opportunity to reduce excess nutrients in our waters comes from non-point sources. And so for the first time, this agency is putting significant time, effort, and energy into non-regulatory, market-based, and community-driven approaches to reducing non-point nutrient pollution. Market-based approaches, and I use that term broadly. I always follow it with such as water quality trading because it's a great example and it's one where we do have a regulatory program where it can assist, but I do like to talk about it more broadly than just trading for some of the reasons that I heard just before I started here that we can dig into a little bit. But these types of approaches have a long history of being used in the water sector to enable point sources like POTWs to meet water quality standards more cost effectively. Market-based approaches require stronger working relationships between non-point and point source dischargers and, for example, between agricultural operations and local governments. And then as trading or these collaborative approaches are developed, they really help to foster those relationships further. And, you know, we really think, it's my personal view and the view of the Office of Water, is that market-based approaches have not reached their full potential. This agency has had policies on the books for more than 15 years. And those policies and approaches have not yielded the type of market-based participation or development that we would have liked to have seen. Where trading has sort of been attempted, sometimes it's failed because there's a limited area where trading can occur, a limited geographic area. Could be because there are the cost of entering the market is high, or that there may be a lack of regulatory drivers. In other cases where trading was tried and perhaps hasn't flourished, maybe because of more rigid requirements for generating credits. Again, that can also result in sort of the cost to enter the market. So promoting and improving market-based approaches has been a major focus of the Office of Water in recent years. And I guess it's been almost 2 years ago now, in February of 2019, we put out an updated policy memo to promote market-based approaches. It's our memorandum on water quality trading identified 6 market-based principles. I'm going to run through them really quickly, but the agency supports all of these market-based principles, and we've tried since then to build out content around as many of them as we can. So the first principle is that states, tribes, and stakeholders should consider implementing water quality trading and other market-based programs on a watershed scale. We're encouraging the use of adaptive management strategies for implementing market-based programs. We encourage water quality credits and offsets to be able to be banked for future use. We encourage simplicity and flexibility in implementing baseline concepts. We wanted to clarify that a single project may generate credits for multiple markets. And also, lastly, financing opportunities exist to assist with the deployment of non-point land use practices. The 2019 memo was intentionally high level to allow policymakers to consider options and opportunities that they may have felt were foreclosed under prior EPA guidance. And so, as I mentioned, we have been working to build out content around some of those principles since the memo was issued. A little more than a year ago, we proposed some new policy options for this baseline concept, seeking public comments on key flexibility concepts, including modifying the baseline policy that has been the agency's position for nearly 20 years, to allow for non-point sources to generate credits sooner. And the 2019 proposal also explained how other tools, including variances and compliance schedules, may be used to facilitate trading and other market-based programs. We received public comments on that proposal, that suite of proposals. We considered those comments, and we are planning to finalize some policy changes very soon. We hope that this effort will help improve the efficiency and the feasibility of trading, particularly in watersheds with EPA-approved TMDLs. So secondly, just last week, the Office of Water issued technical guidance to try to help inform policymakers about setting the size of your trading area. How can we better look at the watershed scale concept and really put some detail on it? So we think that a watershed boundary for planning and achieving water quality improvements is more appropriate and more effective than a municipal or a jurisdictional boundary. A watershed scale really facilitates greater market opportunities and participation. And as a result, resource improvements can also be made on a larger scale. The guidance really addresses three factors for policymakers to consider. The first is, what are your water quality goals? Really take a look at that. What are the local regulatory and policy or guidance, limitations that may exist? You think about cross-state trading. You'd want to make sure that if you wanted to try that both states would have at least similar complementary policies or regulatory programs in place. And the last thing that the guidance addresses is data modeling and data uncertainty. So if you hadn't seen that, I think Dave Ross sent it out last week to the environmental, state and tribal environmental directors. So we should also probably have that on our website, but I have not searched for it myself, so I can't say for sure that it is or it isn't. We are also looking at options to provide some content on this idea of generating credits for multiple markets from a single project. And that's usually called stacking. That word comes with some baggage in the trading world. So, sometimes use it, we sometimes don't. But that concept is really an important one because it gets to some of the things that I heard just before I began my presentation, and that is there are opportunities to not only make water quality improvements, but to come upon water quality improvements because of carbon sequestration. There are, species and habitat improvements that can be made if our lens was a little broader in terms of what markets are we talking about? What do we want to build? What do we want to see flourish out there? And from our standpoint, the opportunity to generate credits for multiple markets through one more holistic environmental improvement project has a greater environmental outcome, and it has a greater potential return on the investment for that landowner. And so we think that that's a really important concept that we want to try to promote and see deployed in programs that have that capacity. So with that, I'm going to kind of wrap up a little bit here, and I think we've got time for questions. I know that I saw some questions come over. I tried to address some of them in my remarks, but I will stop talking now and turn it back over to the room.
Thank you, Ms. Wilderman. Are there any questions from the committee? If there are, please use the raise hand function and we will try to acknowledge you in that fashion.
Gary, I think you're on mute.
Any questions? Well, I'll start with one. One of the things the committee has talked about is would there be the opportunity for EPA to develop pilot projects to help states and tribes get trading off the ground in a more expeditious manner? So curious what your thoughts are on pilot projects.
Well, I don't love pilot projects because there's a thing that happens with pilots, and some people call it pilotitis, and that is you get a pilot going, oh, this looks like it's going to be great. It's a pilot. Maybe your pilot money runs out, and then the pilot is over, and then what? And then what? So how do you translate a pilot into a functioning program? And particularly when we're talking about market-based approaches, it's really important that what we're able to do is to sort of promote the development. I mean, the end game is a self-sustaining marketplace where buyers and sellers are engaging in with demand and supply, and it's working on its own. So the idea of a pilot, I like pilots. I will always support a good, innovative pilot project, but I don't think that they're the silver bullet here, because they come and go. And what we want to do is try to give states, policymakers, tribes who have interest, want to give them a foundation upon which to build a program instead of, a test run at it. And so that comes with developing policies, whether they're through a regulatory program or through a one-off permitting program that could even be a watershed scale permit, where there's a strong foundation to grow it as interest or demand may require. So we want to be as supportive as we can. I think pilots have a place. I think I have been more interested in working directly with these policymakers to try to identify where flexibilities may occur and where opportunities exist to build something solid that can survive.
Thank you. I see Barry Berg has a question. Barry?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for Anna, and I agree with some of the things you were saying, and it brought some things to mind. We piloted a water quality credit trading program in a watershed up here in South Dakota. And through that process, one of the hurdles that we ran into that was the toughest thing to do was a clearinghouse to get something set up to actually trade the credits. And things kind of stopped there. Everything up to that point worked really well. And I'll kind of give you a little background out here in South Dakota. We do not have a statewide nutrient standard. And so trading for the nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, things like that, it's not set up to handle that. Our impairments are E. coli bacteria and total suspended solids in a majority of the watersheds. So anyways, we clunked through the pilot, and at the end of it came up with a potential different swing to the whole system, which was a payment for ecosystem services. And the payment for ecosystem services was based on bacteria and a reduction of bacteria, but it did not come to fruition where we actually traded a credit. We did everything up to trading a credit. Like I said, the clearinghouse was the stopping point or the sticking point there. And I was wondering if there would be some way of regionalizing clearinghouses or standardizing them for states or watersheds, for that matter, that want to do this type of thing, because I see that's a big hurdle to jump over. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a really good comment. And you're right. It is a hurdle. I think it has been a hurdle. I don't think we've seen a lot of really great examples of an established and operating clearinghouse, though there are some that I think are getting very close. And, you know, like the trading programs themselves, which, you know, are going to be driven by the local need. What's the pollutant, as you mentioned, you know, bacteria or nutrients? Who are the players? What are the sources? Who wants to be involved? Where is your state government or maybe your local government in terms of leadership and participation, creativity, you know, finding some money to move the project? All of this stuff has to come locally. And, you know, it's got to come from your state because your state is your primary regulator. That said, the opportunity for a clearinghouse type structure, I think, doesn't have to be run by the government, doesn't have to be run by your state or your county. It could be run by a private entity. I know that the state of Wisconsin recently passed some legislation that is, you know, directed the DNR to, I guess, put out an RFP or some other function to get proposals to run the clearinghouse. So I'm not sure if it's going to be privately run or if it's going to be a sort of pseudo-governmental entity, because I don't know enough details about it. But, you know, that's one state's approach to trying to solve that problem. I know in Iowa, the state is taking on that role themselves. They are, you know, it's not your typical buying, selling credit structures yet, but I think that's where they're looking in the future. But the state is taking on that role. They are the primary holder of registration of reductions and verification of those reductions. And so it's going to depend on I guess I'll say this, there's going to be a cookie cutter approach. But as more of these come online, I think our role, we could have a great role in compiling information and resources, sort of showcasing where there have been successes and where there have been challenges. And we've started to do that on our nutrients website, sort of collecting really interesting approaches that states and others have put together, just to get, you know, kind of create some awareness about different structures, financial structures, regulatory structures, et cetera. So it's a gap, it's a need. And, you know, as we see them come online, I'm going to have my Janita, if she's on the call here, take a note, and we'll put that on the agenda, develop, you know, pull information together and put it out for the public so that we can be facilitating that. It's not really our role to create those, again, because I don't think the federal government should be trying to create a marketplace, but we can try to facilitate the market as appropriate. So thanks for the question.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add one more comment to that, if I may.
Go right ahead.
And also, what we ended up doing, I kind of left this out, but since we have bacteria and total suspended solids for our primary pollutants of concern, we targeted the bacteria side of things. And bacteria are a fickle creature. You get fate and transport along with those. And so putting a number or putting an amount with bacteria is a difficult task altogether. And we do have software that we can run Step L, EPA Step L, and get an idea of what reductions we get for doing a certain practice, a certain BMP. And we got around the clearinghouse thing by using the already set up watershed project to help reimburse producers with the state revolving fund non-point source loan dollars that the watershed project receives to reimburse or an incentive payment on top of what they receive from EQIP or the USDA programs in order to do the BMP and give them a better, incentivize the program, give them a little better edge to do what we're wanting to do based on those reductions that we received from it. So we kind of did stumble through it, but yeah, I just fall short of an actual clearinghouse. It was the watershed project that treated or acted as a clearinghouse and the supplier of the funding and stuff. So it was done, but it'd be nice to have some better ideas or framework to go by. That's all I needed to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Annette Lombardo.
Hi, Anna. Thank you for your comments. I'm out here in California. We have the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We have some bases that don't have access to imported water, so water's been cut to some growers by 45%. So they're looking at creating water organically within the basin. That means cleaning it up. Brackish water, oil-produced water, irrigation water runoff. This is where pilots are really important because the number one concern for agriculture is cost of the water. And a lot of the traditional methods that our water irrigation districts want to use is technology that was created back in the 60s with water that cost $2,000 an acre foot. So what we have to do is we have to try these new technologies and get these pilots in. But there's this breakdown, the irrigation districts, they want to bring in these, the irrigation districts want to bring in these engineering companies who want to create these Taj Mahal facilities. And when actually we just need something that fits inside a container that can be plug and play and hook up to a well. What's happening too is that we're getting zero liquid discharge technologies out there, and we're able to, we're looking at the brine disposal. And there's actually we already have a water market, let me back up. We already have a water market in place, but it's for water quantity. So moving it around the watershed. So what we're trying to do is take the brine discharge. There's someone who's looking at, taking it and pulling out the minerals and doing recycled, selling it off to the recycled mineral market. But is there anybody facilitating any of that you're aware of?
I am only aware of one other water quality and water quantity type of program, and I believe that I want to say Arkansas. I want to say if you Google Arkansas groundwater, water quality market, you might find some program there that I think folks have found to be fairly successful.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. What's up?
Because I think what's the piece that's missing is this national coordination, because everybody's off doing their own things. They're having to, like I said, meet with the compliance of their county or their state, and if there is a public-private partnership that's happening somewhere else, why reinvent the wheel, right? So somehow we've got to have, like the clearinghouse they're talking about, we've got to have something in place where we can save time, energy, and money, and move the technology forward and move these ideas forward. That seems, and the regulatory hurdles to come over seem to be the biggest thing. And there's been a lot of improvement in the regulatory realm, so I'm very thankful for that. But it just seems to be such a barrier to actually solving some of these issues.
Yeah, and I'm not going to disagree with you. One of the questions that came over that I think from you guys was, what hurdles does EPA have in developing a trading framework itself? And I think the answer to that is the same as the answer to sort of your concern, which is, would a national trading framework or program be useful? Maybe, but there isn't a national sort of regulatory arm that could step in and require states or communities to follow a framework or scheme, because know this better than anyone in California. The state is the primary regulator, and certainly for groundwater, really, in most cases, the only regulator. And so that's the challenge in creating a national framework. But again, I think the opportunity that's out there for us is to be a resource, present information, troubleshoot. Like, I always tell people the first place you have to go to develop any kind of real market-based approach is to your state agencies, whether that's your state ag agency or your state environmental, or both. Get them both in the room together. We've done as much as we can do to try to let states and tribes know that we're here to support and troubleshoot and problem solve. And if there's a particular barrier to your, project finding success, what is it? Do we have an opportunity to leverage our relationships across the other federal agencies to try to solve that problem or smooth that path? But that's really our role in this. I think we wouldn't be able to mandate any kind of national program or national framework without an act of Congress. Maybe that's a path forward. Somebody in Congress decides to get creative and be productive and do something great for the environment. I think that's probably going to be an uphill battle, but that is one opportunity, right? And at the same time, same thing to the states. State legislatures can have a big effect on whether these programs are embraced by state environmental agencies, state ag agencies, et cetera. So we can do our best to present information and try to facilitate the development of these programs, but we can't develop those programs or those markets ourselves. It's not really a satisfying answer, but that is kind of the answer.
No, and some of it is not regulatory. Some of it, I think, is just risk. It's like a lot of times we have the technology to solve the problems, but the people who make the decisions are using something that's been tried and true for 30 years. Whether or not, it causes other problems, like, makes it impossible for a whole county to grow vegetables now because of the cost of water, and the margins are gone for any profitability. So there just has to be something, and I don't know how you smooth that pathway. If that pathway is through, how do you reduce that risk tolerance that they'll try new technology?
Yeah, well, here's kind of a crazy idea that I've thrown out to other audiences in the past. But, the American Farm Bureau, they have an insurance company. I mean, they are an insurance company. Maybe there's an insurance product that can be developed that can be a support for some of these risks and unknowns that have been, keeping the marketplace shy. I don't know what that would look like, but it's a thought that I've had. Because what you're talking about is, perhaps an irrigation district that's done this thing for 150 years. They know it works. They know how to work it. They know how to fix it if it breaks. And there's some risk in taking a left turn or a right turn and trying something new that's not demonstrated to that degree. And it's the same thing when you talk about traditional point source dischargers and non-point source dischargers. How do you get a municipality that's run on, a very tight budgetary ship to take a leap and try something new, and that, in a trading market scenario, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of hand-holding. So maybe there's an insurance product that can be developed. Maybe there are organizations out there that are identifying geographic areas where they see opportunities. They are going in. They are holding the hands of the municipalities, the farmers, and the industrial dischargers in that community. And they have to kind of start small as a result of that sort of trepidation and anxiety over trying a new approach. But if you work hard enough, you can get through those barriers. But that's a pretty standard risk profile concern. And I know how this thing works. I know how it's going to affect my bottom line. If I go a different route, what is in store for me? So again, your local regulators can do a lot to provide some comfort in a regulatory scheme, but when you're talking about the price of water, that's pretty important. So I understand.
Thank you.
Graciela, you're on mute.
I think that probably I can make up my answer because by the discussion that you guys have been having, but I would like to, if you could hear something about the non-credit type of marketing projects. I have seen at the local level in various places that there might be collaborations that had been developed for, let's say, exchange of water, like, for example, a POTW that has an effluent rich in nutrients and farmers want it. But when the project is put forward, it's just one example, and it gets to the local regulatory phase for a permit, is not allowed. So the question is like, how this, if you could talk a little bit about how this marketing initiative included the delegated programs and the local governments in the promotion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can speak to the delegated programs under the Clean Water Act, the NPDES permit program, that most states have delegated authority to operate. So those are your water discharge programs. And so there are a few things with, it's going to kind of start to sound like a broken record here, but the work that we've been trying to do is create flexibilities for those state regulatory programs to allow them to see opportunities that might not have been available based on the view of EPA's policy on trading and other market-based approaches from the past. So we are trying to create greater flexibilities within the frameworks that would be developed. I know that there are some opportunities at the state level that state legislatures have enacted where, you know, there's a research exemption to certain requirements under a state program, or there's a pilot exemption for certain technologies or whatever. That can be used to give you the space to try that new technology or try that new approach for a period of time. You know, that sounds like something maybe that would be helpful in the circumstance that you're describing, but your state regulator may not have that as a tool in their program. And so, you know, you really have to look at the holistic program that you're working within, identify where there are opportunities for flexibilities and where there may be opportunities to go to your state, either your regulator or your legislature with opportunities, upside, downside analysis, you know, but you've got to have that support at the state level if you're in a regulatory program. Now, there are a number of non-regulatory trading opportunities that are out there. The buyers are going to be social buyers, right? Corporate social goals. My company is pledging to reduce its carbon footprint or neutralize it, and we're going to buy carbon credits at X amount every year. Those are non-regulatory. They have to go through a verification process like a regulatory credit might, but probably not to the extent. So there are ways to get trading programs operating outside of a regulatory program, essentially bypassing your state regulators who might have this lack of flexibility. But those sort of social programs are going to drive improvements, but they're not going to win the day. To really win the day, to really get markets operating, I think that allowing them to operate in a regulatory zone, inside and outside of the regulatory zone, is really where you're going to get people who are looking to cut their own costs for reducing nutrients and put that money someplace else where it can be used far more efficiently. You know, I think it's those tensions within the regulatory program and the regulatory framework that have the real opportunity to drive this forward.
Amy, this is Chris. Can I hop in with a question real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, Anna, and again, I run water policy for Florida for the ag, but I guess my question is, how is EPA proposing to handle the spatial pieces, which is where I think we came into, we've had some challenges here in the state of Florida because we've got the transboundary issue. And the way I'll put it is, I mean, I think there's a difference between, say, the Chesapeake TMDL, and you've got multi-states and you've got water running through that program, or RGGI in the clean air environment, you know, our interaction with Georgia or Alabama. There's a difference between that and, you know, the spatial extent of a basin with a total maximum daily load that has, you know, if you're looking at 90% agriculture within a basin, it makes it very challenging to set that up. If you're looking at, you know, wastewater treatment plants, it's one thing to say you've got the source, you've got your box, you've got the discharge, and you've got, you know, you've got to meet those water quality criteria, which, as you noted, are the responsibility of the state agency setting it. Our challenges have been that we've had to come up with frameworks on a locality or a regional type of a basis where we've done payment for environmental services for dispersed water management or for water farming, or predicated on the basin in which operations are occurring. And again, it's going to be specific to riparian versus prior appropriation. What markets already exist? What do your water quality criteria and water quality standards look like? And I guess my question is, how does EPA, other than that general overarching, and possibly because we're all looking at the federal funding as well, how do you utilize your programs to look at things both spatially and within kind of a broader context?
Well, the work that I've tried to do at EPA is to try to identify tools that can help define what that spatial scope might be. One of the things that we think that we have in our 2019 memo is, size matters. We are and would be excited to see larger scale markets that might get to some of that. You've got in Florida, right? You're talking about large areas where it's agriculture. And maybe that is one big TMDL, but then you've got other areas that have your industrial dischargers or your POTWs. Is there an opportunity to expand your area beyond what might be in an existing TMDL? TMDLs are great watershed scale planning tools. We have 65,000 of them that EPA has approved. But they're also not the silver bullet at the end of the day. TMDLs can be revised. The impairments in watersheds can be addressed outside of the TMDL framework. It is an informational tool to help make water quality improvements in a defined area. If that defined area doesn't have buyers and sellers, or otherwise doesn't have what you would need to try to see a marketplace develop, the TMDL boundary doesn't have to be the boundary that you work within. You've got larger watersheds. We've got the HUC 2 level, HUC 4, HUC 8. They get pretty big, and so I've really pushed my career team for the last couple of years to help identify what kind of modeling tools would be acceptable, that EPA could show support for, that could help states, also show support for, that could help show the fate and transport of different pollutants through a larger area, but also not missing that field scale data that's so important for these conservation practices and whatnot. So we don't have the perfect model right now. We have those large scale water quality models, and we have field scale conservation practice calculation models. We don't have anything that combines them, that allows you to really look into what's happening on the ground and how does that affect you, your water quality, miles and miles away. That's a tool that I think we need. And I'm here right now at a retreat for the water subcabinet that was announced in an executive order a week or 2 or 3 weeks ago by the president. The subcabinet is Senate confirmed folks from a handful of federal agencies, the Department of Interior, Department of Ag, EPA, and others. And, we're here to talk about where we can use, combine, and consolidate our resource to get the most bang for our buck. USGS has a ton of modeling tools available, and data, so much data. And so we're having these conversations. How can we at EPA, where we've got these goals and these regulatory programs, leverage resources from these other agencies to develop the tools that we need? We need a tool that we don't have right now, and USGS can help us get there. So, it's in process, it's in development. Again, not a perfect answer, but, I like the idea of zooming out. If you can't find there isn't a market for buyers and sellers where you are operating your TMDL, look bigger, look further. And then it's just a question of how far, and what's your support, your scientific support for going that far. You've got, say, you transport nutrients, we've got them all the way from Minnesota, getting all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. That's a pretty big area. But we know that what happens in Minnesota affects what happens in the Gulf of Mexico. And to me, that we could in the future see a trading program aimed at the Gulf that goes all the way up the watershed. So,
Chris, any other questions?
I just following one of the third rails, and this is, and I think that Anna, what you're hitting on is a very interesting dichotomy. I think when you have these broad-based, wide-ranging watersheds, the Mississippi, the Chesapeake, some of the stuff that we're dealing with, ACF and Apalachicola, where you've got transboundary, I think that it's apt. I do know, at least on the state level, and I know that the cooperative federalism framework is very important. We've had very difficult challenges, I think, in going outside the established watershed type of a framework, because the argument has been, well, you're alleviating the issue here, but this is the problem where the water quality challenges arise. So I think, again, that cooperative federalism kind of give and take is great. The water subcabinet, I thought, was a really good, again, depending upon how it's implemented and how it's utilized, is a great idea. I mean, my office runs contracts with USGS in much the similar way that you're speaking, in terms of using them for modeling and land use and looking at what's going on, aquifer mapping. I just think it's going to be interesting, because there's going to be that federal component, and then there's going to be how you operate, understanding the state context and the intrastate issues as opposed to the interstate type of challenges that arise.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jamie.
I think every state that's tried trading comes to it with a certain amount of baggage, and things that have been ingrained over the many years where it's been tried and maybe hasn't flourished. And so what we've tried to do, again, is try to just break some of that apart, break some of that sort of concrete, and get people thinking a little bit differently to try to get a different outcome this time. Because we've been trying for so long with the same outcome, and that is great, excitement, awesome, and then it peters out and dies. It doesn't ever become a self-sustaining market. So, I mean, I don't have the answer, but I think everything we're talking about here and the questions that you all are raising are parts of, a multi-factor answer. And depending on the issues inside Florida, let alone outside Florida with your neighbors, some of these answers are going to apply better for you than in California. And so it's developing a suite of options and opportunities that policymakers can use to make those water quality improvements differently than we've imagined before. And I think that the markets are really going to be the driver for the next great environmental improvements. Because I sadly don't think Congress is going to do anything really anytime soon. I mean, and particularly in environmental issues, they're so charged, they're so emotional, and we just don't have a lot of compromise right now in that space. And so it's going to be up to us, in the administrative state and regulatory environment, and stakeholders outside of those environments to push that. If that's what they want to see, they've got to go to their regulators, they've got to go to their policymakers at the state level and see what they can get done.
Jamie, this is Tom. Can I ask a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
Anna, you may have just answered this, but I know you've traveled around the country and you've met with state regulators, producers, and everyone in between. I'm just curious, what is the attitude about the market system? Is it more of skepticism, or if there were a clearinghouse established and if there were a market, would people be eager to participate, or is it more skepticism and fear, if you will, the risk that Jeanette's referred to? Is that more the message that you've heard, or is it more one of optimism and excitement that, yeah, we need this? This would be a good answer. And
it's
go
both.
ahead, answer that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's both. And in some places it's more excitement, in other places it's more skepticism. And then where it's both, it's a lot of excitement and interest and desire, but then the sort of lingering fear about the litigation. So even states who have really wanted to pursue trading for a long time continually fall into this, multiple layers of belts and suspenders to fend off the litigation, fairly or unfairly. But the multiple layers of belts and suspenders have the effect of creating a more costly program and financial barriers to entry into the program that ultimately can undermine the program itself. And so, I think there's a lot of excitement in a lot of places. Wisconsin is a great example again, and they are using this legislation to build this clearinghouse approach, which, we'll see. Does it work for Wisconsin? And if it does, what did they do differently that we haven't seen before? In a lot of states, there's a lot of excitement, but there's farmers. You've met farmers are skeptical. So I think a lot of farmers don't think necessarily that this is the end all be all, but they also haven't really seen a great example of it working and operating in a way that we vision it to really have a potential to, be a new stream of income, farm revenue from the sale of credits, particularly in very tough economic times. Environmental credits, environmental markets could just be a really interesting way to secure a little bit of income for those farmers that are already, practicing conservation measures, deploying clean water practices because they need it to, not because the law requires them to, but because they need it and they know how to do it. And so I think it's a mixed bag. And, for the folks who are excited about it, but who are afraid and risk averse and worried about litigation and worried about, legal enforcement, on the litigation side, we think about that every day at EPA. Literally everything we do, we get sued. So, usually by both sides. So whatever we do, we're building a record to support the decision. We're building a record to show that the thing that we're doing is going to do what we say it's going to do. This program we're developing is going to result in water quality improvements. That's what you need to show. That's the record you need to build to support a trading program. And it can be done. It can be done through modeling. As we've kind of talked about, it can be done with a lot of great innovative tools and information that we have now that maybe we didn't have 5 or 10, and certainly not 20 years ago. So you build a record to show that what you're doing is creating water quality improvements, and you ride it. You make water quality improvements. You improve your community. You improve your resources, and if that's happening, if your program is resulting in water quality improvements, let them sue you. Let them ask a judge to shut down water quality improvements. I think that'd be a hard thing to do.
Well, and that leads into my second question, and that is the science there to actually verify the water quality improvements? Do we know? I think about the technology that Jeanette referred to, and that's a piece of equipment that you have a known quantity of reduction or so forth. But if I'm planting cover crops or putting in filter strips or a whole host of other conservation practices that might happen on farms and ranches, is the science there to be able to know what our reductions would be? Is that something that we need to be developing today? Should that be one of our recommendations, is that we start building that science and that database so that we're closer to an actual known quantity?
Yeah, I mean, I think the science is there in a lot of places. USDA has developed this NTT, the nutrient tracking tool. That's a field scale model that you can put conservation practices in. You put your soil profile or maybe even your GPS, and they can pull their own soil maps up, and they can tell you what that practice will yield in reductions. And, they kind of have to have tools like that because they put so much money out into the world for the purpose of conservation practices, and really need, as a country, but certainly as an agency, for us all to understand the benefit that those practices are yielding. And so USDA has developed this great tool. I think it can be and has been calibrated to a state level. So I think Iowa's had it calibrated. I think Ohio maybe has it calibrated to, the state specific soil profiles, geology, and other things, climate. And so those agencies, state agencies, are using those tools. And I think there are plenty of tools like that out there. Can always stand to be refined and developed. But yeah, I think the science is there. I think you'll have people now in most places. Okay. We all learned through the nutrients litigation in Florida that sometimes in some places the science is more complex. And so you develop tools to meet that complexity, and that can be done, has been done. And so perhaps one of the things you guys, might think about is there a way to identify the best tool or the most appropriate tool for this use, or a suite of tools that the agriculture community agrees with, supports, would be interested in supporting in the future, things like that, so that there's not only the intersection here of point sources and non-point sources. There's also the intersection of engineers, lawyers, policymakers. And so sort of bridging the gap there. I worked with farmers on the private sector side, and every farmer's got their ag engineers and their agronomists, and they sit and they work through these things in a very technical way. This is, the discussion about these models is really just the next step. It's taking all of that farmer's agronomy information and engineering information and putting it into a calculator and showing the outcome. Now, having said that, that scares a lot of farmers too, right? Because that's your data, it's your farm information. And so we've got some places where we have to help folks get comfortable sort of on all sides of this. And I think that might be one of them.
That's hard to do, Anna, if I could add something real quick, Tom, is, because sometimes building consensus within the industry is hard in itself. And then also, even in California, you have different counties that are way ahead of others, even with Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. For example, Ventura County is doing every well is metered and it's reporting electronically, wirelessly to the county, right? And other states don't, other counties don't even have meters on their wells. So it's like getting everybody up to an even playing field where one county doesn't feel like they're at a competitive disadvantage to other counties. That's, I think, part of the step. And then getting, part of it is education too, is, you know, to get that consensus. Because you have to let people understand the why it's important that we have to do this, that it's needed, and because you have to have buy-in on that cost, right? And the lawyers, right? Because everything with water that's going to affect your land has to go through the family lawyer to make sure, to figure out how you're going to be affected. So I think, you know, and this is, you know, and you bring up a good piece. I think once our committee decides what to do, Tom and Jamie, we have to do, we have to reach out to our regional EPA directors and start there in our state water boards and have a collaborated, that the collaboration that we're looking for, I think, can start with us. So thank you very much for your comments.
Tom, Don Brown here. We in Colorado encountered the fact that we simply did not have the data that you're referencing. We had the groundwater component. It was in the Colorado Department of Agriculture. But the non-point piece was sitting over in the Colorado Department of Health and Environment under the Water Quality Commission. And our agriculture producers came to us and the Department of Ag and said, can you move this over? Can you get this over into CDA where we think we've got it? And they came to me. I made them come to me 3 years in a row before I approached the legislature. And since we had the farmers' support of the agricultural groups, legislature saw fit to move it over in the Colorado Department of Agriculture. And now we are gathering non-point source data so that we're ready, because we're going to have to be ready.
Good.
So that was something that worked well for us.
That is an absolutely critical first step because the data's there somewhere. We know that it's somewhere, but the right agencies or all of the agencies might not have access to it. And that's actually something we're also talking about at the federal level here, because there are some states that don't have access to the federal USDA data. And there's a lot of discussion here about what do states need to start having these conversations. So it's a great point. I'm glad to hear that you went after it and you kept after it and you're starting to get it now. I was working with folks in Oklahoma and Arkansas a year or two ago. They're very interested in developing a cross-state trading program on the Illinois River, which has been the subject of litigation between those two states for water quality for generations. And so it's so fun now that they're excited and interested about pursuing something like this on this important resource. And the first thing that they started to do was inventory of what data do we have, what data do we need, is it all in the same format, can we plug it into the same type of computery thing so that we can get the same output across our two states. And so it's a great point. Need the data, need to also respect the farmer privacy, make sure that the agencies are doing everything that they can and should be doing in that respect, but need the data.
Anna, Gary Mahaney, I think I'm off mute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I'm about as technical. I'm still looking for a look damn it button on computers. So look damn it, this is what I want you to do. Anyway, this program reminds me a lot about a few years ago. There was a program for the people were trying to get started for carbon sequestration. But the problem with that program, they will come to us, and if you do certain things, we'll pay you money to sequester carbon. And you don't plow, you don't fit the field, you don't do anything basically forever. but the money they were talking about was so minuscule, we wouldn't even consider doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be a problem here. You have a polluter downstream or upstream that doesn't want to, he's going to have to buy certain credits. Well, he thinks those credits are worth and what I might think they're worth, long ways apart.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that can kill a market. You've got to have the commodity that is to be bought and sold at a price that's both sides agree on. In the case of water quality, in the case of POTWs, for example, the value of those reductions, I think, is a little bit easier to pinpoint, particularly where those dischargers might have a horizon. They might have a 5-year window between which they need to figure out how to meet a certain discharge limit. And if they can't meet it now, they've got to invest to meet that limit. And they can, they can run the cost of money out. What do they need to meet that limit? Do they think their limit's going to get lower over the next 10 or 15 years? And should they really be planning out a 20-year horizon for these effluent limits? And what does that cost look like? And how many pounds do they need to reduce by? So in that framework where there's a regulatory requirement, there's, you can get contract bids, known quantity dollar price for reductions, and you can identify that down to the price per pound of reductions. So if that discharger is going to be paying $850 a pound, based on their calculations, to reduce phosphorus through their brick and mortar facility, and they can find a farmer or a landowner, non-farmer conservation landowner, that can make those same reductions for $300 a pound, $50 a pound. That's a huge opportunity there, where if that discharger was going to spend $850 a pound and they can pay a fraction of it, half of it, even 3/4 of it, and get those same reductions in the watershed, they can quantify the price and the value of that reduction. It's when you're in this realm of like the carbon sequestration, the carbon markets that are primarily voluntary, where there's going to be that challenge. That's not to say that voluntary markets can't drive themselves, because I think there are, and there will be future opportunities in that respect. But it's easier to pinpoint a price when you are in a regulatory environment.
We're out of time, and I have 2 hands, so I'm going to try to get to them real quick. Lauren?
Yeah, thank you. I think my question kind of feeds off of this last point and the concept of stacking, Anna, that you mentioned early on. And knowing that you're sitting in a hotel room at the water sub-cabinet, are there any discussions in that space on helping people to start to think about stacking? Here in Illinois, I think a lot of people are thinking kind of down, I think they would say 2 separate paths. One is water quality and the other is carbon sequestration. But, I represent Illinois farmers through the Farm Bureau, and we would do the same practice to result in benefit and probably could bring some return back to the farm for the, economic side of the equation that you had mentioned before. So I just wonder if there's any sort of administrative discussions on making that connection for us.
The answer is, thank you for asking the question. I have it on my agenda to pull some folks aside for some sidebars and a proposal for the sub-cabinet to make a statement along those lines. What that statement looks like, what's the deliverable, how is it presented to the public, and how is it presented to states and stakeholders? All those questions to be determined after I have my opening discussions with folks here actually today and tomorrow. So it's on my personal agenda. I know that it's on my boss's agenda. And it's an incredibly important conversation that I think we can get a ton of value from with not a lot of effort in terms of coordinating the federal government on embracing multi-use markets is another way of saying it without all the baggage of stacking. But the outcome is the same. Let's get more holistic results and a more wholesome return on your financial investment and your resource investment. So short answer is yes, but TBD.
All right, Barry, you're the last one. You stand between us and a break.
All right, I'll be quick then. I'm just going to expound on Anna's comments on the software stuff to figure out reductions from different pollutants. And I've used the EPA's STEP L model, STEPL model, and it was created by Tetra Tech for EPA, and it's a really good comprehensive model that works for every state. I believe they have every state programmed in it for climate, for rainfall and stuff like that. And Anna, you mentioned the USDA one.
NTT.
Yeah, NTT.
Mm-hmm.
And this one's more comprehensive, yet it's not getting into the realm of these really crazy watershed tools that you have to be an engineer to basically get them to work. But it's pretty easy as well. And it is created, or EPA had it created through Tetra Tech. And it would be very easy to standardize or have people use this that are doing watershed projects or working on a watershed project scale, because that's what it's built for. And it's built for as large of a scale as you want. You can get as intense with it as you want, or you can stand back at the 1,000-foot lens and still get output to work from it. And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there, but standardizing something to this effect and a tool that you guys already have or that EPA has would be probably pretty easy to do. And that's what I use up on the watershed project up here. And East Dakota, who I work for, they've done a ton of assessment work. And so we have all of the data to plug into this system and run it through to see, where these reductions need to take place. And I don't know, maybe I take that for granted that we have all that information here, but it just seems that would be maybe a starting point to use something like that and get everybody standardized using something similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
I appreciate that comment, and I'll leave you with this. Thank you. I'm not familiar with that model, but I am familiar with the relative hesitance that some have to trusting something that EPA developed and puts out on the street. And I've seen it when I've spoken with folks across the country. We kind of shift. We shift with the winds a little bit in terms of how much we support agriculture. And we have, an enforcement zone that can be difficult. So that is all just to say, sometimes the delivery of the tool is as important as the utility of the tool. And with USDA presenting and delivering the NTT tool, there may be folks out there who find it more trustworthy for these purposes, for these discussions, than they would if EPA put it out. And even more so if USGS, as sort of the science arm, has its name on the model. So I just raised that. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the support for the tool. But different people are going to view its legitimacy based on the delivery and the presentation. So it's just another challenge that we have here, trying to be EPA and trying to build partnerships. So But I want to thank you guys for the time today. Great questions. I hope you all have great discussions today, and I hope that you figure out how to solve some of these problems for us. Let's get it done.
Thank you very much for your time. We look forward to working with you in your office some more in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Chairman Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Anna, thank you very much. Thanks to all the committee members. This has been a great discussion, and this is exactly what we need to do today. We are 7 minutes late to a break. At the risk of being overrode, I would say let's meet back at 1:05 Eastern, and we'll try to get our 15 minutes in. We've got very short break times today, so let's all be back at 1:05, and we'll begin our next presentation at that time. Thank you.
Hello and welcome back to the U.S. EPA's Farm Branch and Rural Communities Advisory Committee meeting agenda for November 12th. Again, the tech support link is above the video player, and we should have the archive of this video up at the same website within 24 to 48 hours. Wanted to mention that. Without further ado, I'm going to now turn it over to Tom McDonald. Tom?
Dave, thank you, and welcome back to the Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Committee meeting. One person that was not able to talk on the roll call is Jim Zook, and Jim is on the call now. Jim, if you would you like to tell us who you're with and who you represent?
Yes, Tom. This is Jim Zook. I'm the Executive Director for the Corn Marketing Program of Michigan and the Michigan Corn Growers Association. And I'm very honored to be on this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm sorry we had the technical issues earlier. So with that, we're going to continue our water quality and water quantity work group discussions. Our next speaker is Sharon Napier. Dr. Napier is currently the National Program Lead for Water Reuse in the Office of Water at the United States Environmental Protection Agency. She specializes in environmental health, microbiology, and quantitative microbial risk assessment, and most recently helped develop the National Water Reuse Action Plan. Sharon, thank you for being with us today, and the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to the committee and to Rebecca for the invitation to participate in the meeting today. We're very interested in how we can best engage the ag sector in the effort that I'm about to share with you. So I am so excited to be joining you here today to talk about the National Water Reuse Action Plan, which was released this past February 27. For those that are not familiar with this plan, this is not an EPA plan and it's not a federal plan. This is really a full water sector plan, and it's really more than about water reuse. It's about rethinking how we can take a more integrated watershed-based approach to managing our water resources. And it's about how we can better collaborate as partners across the water sector, and ultimately how we can improve the security, sustainability, and resilience of our nation's water resources. Next slide, please. So for today's session, I'll start with a brief overview of the Water Reuse Action Plan, or as we call it, the WRAP. The cover of the print product that was released in February is shown here, which can be downloaded from our website. And I'll also send it to Rebecca to share with the committee after the presentation. I'll also discuss the online platform, which was launched at the same time in February, and provide a brief overview on the implementation status of several WRAP actions. And finally, I'll close with information on how we often encourage folks to get involved in what's next for the WRAP looking forward. Next slide, please. So EPA's Assistant Administrator, David Ross, he really led the charge to create the Water Reuse Action Plan. Dave began his career working on membrane technologies in San Diego for reuse operations for over 20 years ago. And Dave Ross is passionate about water reuse and saw an opportunity to issue an action plan that includes clear commitments and accountability for actions that will further water reuse and help ensure the long-term sustainability, security, and resilience of the nation's water resources. So pictured here are federal leaders and Water Reuse Association representatives who attended the launch of the draft Water Reuse Action Plan in September of 2019 at the Water Reuse Symposium in San Diego. And it's really already demonstrating his leadership for bringing folks across the water sector together. Next slide, please. So why pursue an action plan for water reuse? And in the United States, there's really a number of drivers for why different regions of the country are now considering water reuse. And drought is, of course, a big one. The GAO noted that within 10 years, 40 states expect to face freshwater shortages. And some of these same regions really want to reduce their reliance on imported water. Other areas are looking for alternatives to managing stormwater or addressing groundwater overdrafts. And some of these same areas are seeking to just diversify their water portfolio to enable long-term sustainability. And there is this clear potential to reclaim more of our nation's waters to help with these water issues. So when we look across the big buckets of sources of water for potential reuse, so those could be municipal wastewater, agricultural water, industrial wastewater, oil and gas produced water, and storm water, we estimate that nearly 350 billion gallons per day are being discharged. And over 280 billion gallons are potentially available for water reuse applications. And so this plan really aims to reduce barriers currently preventing water use where it makes sense, and to allow our nation to better capture water for their regional, state, tribal, or local community needs. And the WRAP's objectives, or the Water Reuse Action Plan's objectives of enhancing water security, sustainability, and resilience, really aim to daylight enhance comprehensive strategies and solutions to meet diverse water quality and quantity needs. Next slide, please. And so when we designed the Water Reuse Action Plan, we followed a number of guiding principles. And while we want to better consider water reuse within integrated water resources management planning, it is imperative that we protect public health and the environment. Additionally, we want to promote collaborative actions and partnerships and build on the 40+ years of experience of our global reuse leaders. We wanted the individual actions to be impactful and to defer to state and local needs. We also sought to implement and communicate this plan and its progress in a transparent way with built-in accountability. And finally, we applied adaptive management and governance to its design, promoting a glowing collaboration of actions among federal, state, local, and private sector partners. Next slide, please. And so the WRAP, as I mentioned, was released in February, and it was released by EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler, along with several cabinet officials from our federal partner agencies. And the plan was released exactly 1 year after Dave Ross announced that we were going to develop the plan. He announced it on February 27th, 2019. And under Dave's leadership, this plan was developed at lightning speed for the federal government. In 1 year, EPA held 2 public comment periods. We participated in 2 convenings. We went through 2 OMB reviews. We conducted a literature review, outreach to numerous stakeholders, and we produced both the draft and this version 1 document. And it is available in 2 forms. I mentioned we have the printed publication, but in February, we also, and perhaps more importantly, launched the online platform that is updated in real time. So you can just simply go and look up the National Water Reuse Action Plan online platform and see what's happening in real time and see these actions. And so we've organized this plan into 11 strategic themes, which I'll show you in a few minutes. And the printed publication includes 37 developed or active actions in total, with over 200 implementation milestones. Our actions are led by nearly 30 unique action leaders, and EPA is just one of those leaders, and more than 80 different action partners. So it's including our state and NGO, tribes, and regional folks. This plan represents the first initiative of its magnitude to be coordinated across the water sector, and it's growing. Next slide, please. So here are some of the pictures of the online platform, which, as I mentioned, is updated regularly. So the online platform really serves as a repository for all of our active actions. So when we created an action, it really does require more than just an idea. A developed and active action has an action leader and in many cases partners or an action team. It has background information on why this action is being conducted. It identifies different opportunities to be gained from completing the action. And it has a series of implementation milestones that clearly display the interim steps for the action's completion. And so in the spirit of transparency and accountability, each of these implementation milestones also have a targeted completion date. And I'll show you an example, a few example actions in a minute. We also have a web page that houses undeveloped RAP actions and ideas. So undeveloped actions were those proposed in the draft action plan that was released in September 2019 and still need leaders and partners. We also have a list of additional action ideas that were suggested in the public docket. So the online platform, it provides details on all of this information, the backgrounds and opportunities to be gained. It identifies those leaders and partners with point of contact information. So both the names and the email addresses are included. And it captures milestones in progress, highlighting the outputs as products are completed. It is also meant to help form the pipeline for new action ideas and future collaborations. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, the RAP features 11 different strategic themes, and those are listed here. And so, as you'll see over the next few slides, that we do have several ag-related actions, and they fall under the themes of policy coordination, science and specification, water information availability, and finance support. You can go to the next slide, please. So the following slides outline a handful of RAP actions that may be of particular interest to this group. And I'd also like to mention that there are several additional actions of potential interest to the ag sector that aren't listed here, including one related to seeking information on understanding of current aquifer storage and recovery practices. So if you go on the online platform, it's action 2.7.4. In the search bar, you can search by word or number. Each of our actions has a number associated with it. We also have one related to developing national integrated water availability assessments. But before jumping into the actions that are listed right here, I'd like to give you a flavor of how we have engaged with the ag sector to date. EPA has conducted outreach to regional ag advisors and has introduced them to the regional water reuse liaisons. We've had numerous interactions with USDA and its various services through federal engagement efforts. At the launch of the Water Reuse Action Plan in February, we were fortunate to be joined by USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue and NRCS Chief Matt Lohr. And USDA has been a great collaborator from the beginning, leading 3 different RAP actions. We'll walk through some of those in a minute. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so if you go on the online platform, here's some of the information you will see related to the actions. So here on the left side, you'll see the action leader. In this case, there's no partners. All of the implementation milestones are listed here on the right side, and those that are completed are in green. And in the platform, if you were clicking on one of these milestones, you would see more information in text updates. You would see an output if there was any, if there was a report or any other type of document that would be associated with that milestone. You'd see the targeted completion dates as well as the actual completion dates for that accountability and transparency piece. So this action seeks to identify USDA programs that could lend themselves to water reuse to enhance the integration of agricultural reuse. For this action, USDA is leveraging these programs to achieve water reuse advances by providing financing and grants, technical assistance, and conservation initiatives. In April, USDA announced $15 million for conservation innovation grants, and this is showcased as an output on the online platform. And we are pleased to just recently find out that over $1.2 million of this was just awarded specifically for water reuse projects. Next slide, please. So this is an action that I'm helping lead, and EPA is the main leader for facilitating the implementation of this action in coordination with many water association partners, which are all listed here on the left side. And this action is really quite large. It is about compiling existing fit-for-purpose specifications. So fit-for-purpose specifications, they describe and they quantify the water quality characteristics or treatment necessary to meet end-use or application needs. So this definition recognizes that there are different sources of water and different end-use applications, and the treatment and the water quality parameters associated with those different sources of water and applications will differ. So for example, if you have municipal wastewater and you want to treat it for a potable use, you would have to string together many different unit treatment processes and disinfectants and have very stringent water quality metrics, of course. And if you have stormwater, and you might want to treat it for landscape irrigation or gray water for toilet flushing, those could have very different treatment requirements or water quality parameters associated with it. So the definition is really getting at the idea that the water truly is fit for its intended use. And so what we've done under this action to date, we've compiled a set of current state, federal, and international fit-for-purpose specification documents. We've compiled these documents with the fit-for-purpose specifications in them. We're also taking a look at the technical basis for the specifications. And again, we're looking across those really big sources of water for potential reuse, the municipal, ag, industrial, stormwater, and produced water, and across a series of different application types, like potable, various types of irrigation, on-site reuse, and other non-potable reuses. And so, of course, this can include chemical or pathogen limits that make treated water suitable for ag use. And we have just now collected and extracted data from over 120 different documents, and we're in the process of reviewing those data and, again, identifying the technical basis. And I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to make this information available in the next year. Next slide, please. Okay, I just talked about the definition for fit-for-purpose specification, and this particular action seeks to create a specification for a very specific source water and end use. And in this case, it's for wastewater in food animal protein processing facilities. So Action 2.3.5, it seeks to establish a process for potential reuse of on-site animal protein processing wastewater for all food processing applications, including food contact that maintains protection of food quality and consumer health. So the objectives of this particular action include characterizing the quality of the animal protein processing wastewater. You, of course, need to know what's in that wastewater so you can know how much you need to treat it. Determining the treatment requirements necessary to achieving public health benchmarks. So when we do our risk analyses, of course, it's a good idea to have a targeted public health benchmark or risk benchmark in place. And identify then the potential treatment train configurations to meet our treatment targets. We do now have a cooperative research and development agreement in place that's available as the output under the milestone 1. Next slide, please. Okay, Action 2.4.2, this is implement the new Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium. So this action is based on an MOU between New Mexico Environment Department and the New Mexico State University. And central to this action is the Produced Water Research Consortium, and it involves participation from dozens of experts. This work is going to address current science and technology gaps to better inform policies for the use of treated produce water, outside of the oil and gas industry. All right, next slide, please. Action 2.6.4, compile and promote existing USDA resources for rural communities. This action seeks to identify, compile, and promote USDA funding opportunities for water and wastewater infrastructure projects that can advance reuse and conservation. And these opportunities include the Rural Development's Water and Waste Disposal Loan and Grant programs, and a compiled list of reuse projects funded by the Water and Waste programs was published and is now available as an output. So if you're on the online platform and click on this first milestone, you can see a document that notes that currently 54 projects have been identified. The action team is also working to promote information and technical assistance to both rural communities and farmers on assessing opportunities for water reuse. And so while it shows both of these milestones as complete, many of our actions are ongoing, and new milestones will be added in the future. Next slide, please. So to stay true to the iterative and dynamic nature that the Water Use Action Plan was designed under, we have also developed a quarterly onboarding process for new actions. So in addition to updating the online platform regularly, we also provide public quarterly updates to highlight progress, outreach, and outputs. Proposed actions will be announced in conjunction with our action plan quarterly updates. And the past two are now available on EPA's water reuse webpage. And as we release our quarterly updates, details about the proposed actions are posted on the online platform for public review. And during this period of review, the RAP teams will work with the proposed action leaders to communicate feedback and encourage collaboration across all these different partners where appropriate. And at the close of the quarter, actions that address and incorporate feedback from federal leadership, our water reuse team, and the public would become fully developed active RAP actions. And so this past quarter, just a few weeks ago, late October, we introduced 4 new proposed actions. And feedback on these new actions can be sent to waterreuse@epa.gov through November 30th. And in January, we will fully onboard developed actions, some of these actions, hopefully all of them, and introduce the next set of new proposed actions in the next quarterly update and on the online platform. So on the next slide, I'm just going to show you these new actions. Next slide, please. So here are the 4 proposed new actions that are being developed by EPA, Department of Energy, and NAWI, or the National Alliance for Water Innovation, and the Water Research Foundation. And they represent 4 strategic themes. Again, the online platform displays more information on each of these actions. So the first one, engagement with disadvantaged and small communities on water reuse. This is led by EPA Region 9. I'll provide more details on the specific action in a moment. This is under the policy coordination theme. Action 2.3.6, this is viral pathogen and surrogate approaches for assessing treatment performance in water reuse. This is led by EPA and is related to a $6 million EPA STAR grant for research. And this RFA was just announced late October and represents the science and specifications theme. Action 2.4.6, implement and manage the National Alliance for Water Innovation, or NAWI, Energy and Water Desalination Hub, is led by Department of Energy and the National Alliance for Water Innovation and represents the technological and validation theme. It's really about creating roadmaps for new technologies for various sources of water in the formation of the desalination hub. And finally, action 2.5.2, identify monitoring practices for reuse application. And this is led by the Water Research Foundation. All right, next slide. And we just wanted to provide more information on the new action related to engagement with disadvantaged communities, as there could be some interest with the ag community. And this is the one that's under development. It's seeking to identify the challenges faced by disadvantaged and small communities in the context of water reuse, improve the understanding of needs, and develop water reuse training materials to help build capacity. Next slide. All right, so communicating progress. As I mentioned, the online platform helps us communicate progress, and despite many issues we've all faced with COVID, we're pleased to report that we are still actively progressing on implementing the action plan. Thus far, 121 implementation milestones out of 270 have been completed. Additionally, more than 30 new milestones have been added since February. So as I mentioned, many of our action leaders or partners are adding milestones to their actions. The online platform, I've mentioned the online platform is updated weekly, and we have just added a function to highlight those recently updated actions. About 700 total updates across the 35 actions have been made since the plan's launch. And finally, we work to ensure that regular outreach and engagement occurs. This is not something that happens and is created in a vacuum. We issue public quarterly updates, as I've mentioned, the next of which will be released in January. We hold meetings for our action leaders to discuss action progress, possible cross-action collaboration, as well as new action ideas. We have ongoing discussions with federal, state, tribal, and local stakeholders. And we highlight recent outputs and accomplishments of the Water Reuse Action Plan leaders and partners in upcoming activities related to the implementation on the WRAP Action Activities and Highlights webpage. There's lots of different ways we are trying to communicate progress. Next slide, please. So what's next for the WRAP and looking forward? Of course, our action leaders and partners are very focused on implementing the 37 developed actions. This is no small feat. And we anticipate, however, that we're going to be providing a big spring update in 2021. And in this update, or the next iteration of the plan, will be highlighting progress across our 37 actions, demonstrating the collective impact of our efforts and showcasing the new and expanded actions. And as we're thinking ahead to this big update, the WRAP team's continuing to assess how to best engage the agricultural sector in the effort. And we'd really like to, of course, better understand notable and unique examples of water reuse in the ag sector, existing policies and practice for agricultural water reuse, and notable potential contacts and experts in agricultural reuse. Next slide, please. Something else that I wanted to mention, that on October 13th, the president issued an executive order titled Modernizing America's Water Resource Management and Water Infrastructure to Strengthen Federal Coordination and Collaboration. And this executive order formally established the Interagency Water Subcabinet for this purpose, and it'll be chaired by U.S. Department of Interior and EPA, include officials from USDA, Department of Commerce, Department of Energy, and Department of Defense. And it specifically also called out implementation of the Water Reuse Action Plan as one of the priority activities. And so this executive order will further enable partnerships to advance enduring reuse efforts across the country. Of course, to reiterate, implementation of the WRAP is an iterative process that is dependent on our action leaders and our partners across the full water user community, and not just the federal government, to be successful. Next slide, please. And so when we're talking to our water sector and partners, we note that there's really 3 ways that people can get involved. We're always looking for folks to propose actions or provide input on the new proposed actions. And so I mentioned the online platform provides information on the active actions, the ones that are already built out with leaders and partners and milestones. But we have the undeveloped actions, again, from the draft action plan and action ideas that were suggested in the public docket. And those are all housed on a web page related to undeveloped wrapped actions and ideas on our water reuse website. And we invite folks to lead the development of any of those ideas, propose new actions, and or provide input, again, on the new actions through our waterreuse@epa.gov website. The WRAP Action Development Cycle webpage also contains information on how to lead the development of an action and provide input on the proposed actions. You can also support an existing action. If there's an action that you're interested in participating in, you can simply just reach out to the action leaders about possible roles. Again, their information is available on the online platform. And finally, you can just stay in the loop. Folks can always just follow action implementation progress on the online platform, which I've mentioned. Additionally, we do have a listserv, and to join our listserv and learn about progress the EPA and its partners across the water reuse community have made, you can also email us at that same website, or email address rather. Next slide, please. So this slide frames some water reuse opportunities from an agricultural perspective. And I mentioned we're looking for the best ways to engage the agricultural community in this effort in the Water Reuse Action Plan. Identifying notable or unique examples of water use in the ag sector. So of course, ag runoff and irrigation return flows can be used as sources of water for potential reuse. But also ag water can be used as an application, reusing water for an ag purpose like crop irrigation. And of course, aquifer recovery, aquifer recharge and recovery. Additionally, we'd like to identify existing policies and practices for agricultural water reuse, as well as identifying notable potential contacts and experts in agricultural water reuse. So ag groups like the American Farm Bureau Federation, National Association of Conservation Districts, the National Association for State Departments of Agriculture, as well as USDA. Next slide, please. So as we've discussed, USDA has been a great leader in helping us with ag within the Water Reuse Action Plan, but we'd like to encourage more engagement, of course, across the ag sector. And there are opportunities for advancing technologies, exploring policy solutions, and addressing needs that are difficult for us to recognize at the federal level sometimes. So we would really like to understand more about reuse that's already happening on farms and opportunities and barriers for regional reuse projects. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the RAP is not a federal plan, and we encourage participation from the ag associations, the conservation districts, and others who bring various perspectives on the needs, the challenges, and the opportunities for ag reuse. So I thank you for your interest, and again, thank you to Rebecca and the committee for the invitation to participate today.
Thank you, Sharon. This is Jamie Burr with Tyson Foods. While everyone's thinking about their questions, would you please, committee members, use the hand function, and we will try to catch those as the questions come up. Sharon, if you don't mind, do you mind taking just a couple minutes and talk about the CRADA process, and specifically the CRADA that we have between Tyson and EPA, please?
I unfortunately was not part of that CRADA development process. That CRADA is specifically with our Office of Research and Development. I also know that Office of Wastewater Management has been involved in that, but I can always direct you to the correct folks. Jay Garland, I don't know if he's one of our top scientists at the Office of Research and Development. He's the one that's listed as the action leader for that particular action, and he can probably help fill you in on that process.
Okay. Well, it's a different time for the committee. Any questions from the committee members?
Jamie, I've got a question while we're waiting for others to get their questions. Sharon, this is great, and I'm very supportive. When I see the fit for purpose work that's been done, you know, in my mind, the water is fine. The quality is great for the use that it's designed for. My question is, what are you doing to bring the public along so that we maintain that public trust in our water system? My fear is as there's more reuse occurring, there will be more skepticism in the public.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. So, you know, one thing we really want to do once we finish this compilation is make it publicly available, and hopefully in a user-friendly online tool. So if you're wondering where potable reuse is happening across the United States, maybe 4 or 5 states might pop up that have potable reuse regs, let's say, or regs related to irrigation reuse. So hopefully it will make it very transparent and available for people to see where it's happening. There's a follow-on action that I'm hoping that'll occur, that once we finish this compilation, we can identify what's out there, how are those specifications designed, and which type of specifications need to be improved, or where is the science that's needed to actually help us better understand the risks behind reuse practices. So I think we have our work cut out for us, and especially with the public trust, I hear you on that. There are actions also related to a strategic theme on public communication of reuse. And so this is something the Water Reuse Association is currently leading, and going to be looking at best practices for communication, as well as hopefully creating new tools to gain that public trust. And I think one of their big hopes is to work with the public health community or the medical community, so that we do have the public trust behind reuse. Because I think we know that the technologies are there. It can be done safely. It's just helping communicate what's really happening.
Yeah, I see this akin to what's happening on pesticides right now, where, you know, the science is there. There should be no question, but yet the lawsuits are flying, and sometimes people don't understand the science. And there needs to be a PR campaign ahead of it.
Yeah, agree. And I will note that, our work has been presented at the Water Reuse Symposium. I mentioned it a few times because this is where Dave Ross released the draft plan September 2019. And we also had several actions reporting out in the last September symposium, of course, which was virtual in 2020. The next one is going to be in March, and I believe their theme is going to be related to public health. And I'm sure they'll have a number of dialogues about communication and how we can best communicate reuse and how it can be done safely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jeanette Lombardo. You're on mute, Jeanette.
Sorry. Sharon, thank you for the presentation. I really love it. It's so great to see you working with NAWI in the Department of Energy. I'm in California, so I do a lot of work with the desalination hub. So, and that whole collaboration is great. You're brave. It's a huge undertaking. You're putting people who normally wouldn't even sit in a room together. The ag municipal water. I mean, ag loses water every time the cities grow. So that's brave undertaking. We're seeing a lot in our area with oil produced water. And that is becoming actually a reliable source of water. And there's some new technology to clean it up, especially in the tree crop industry. We do have some food safety issues that have to be addressed. And I think once people are more comfortable with that, our State Water Resources Board out here, they seem to go one way and then another. It's like, okay, you have to put it in the ground, keep it there 6 months, pull it back out. Oh, no, you don't need to do that. And so when you're a farmer and you want to rely on that source of water, especially in our area, when they're making agreements to buy that water, because it's, like say you're in a hydroponic house, for example, you can afford to pay a higher price of water for that water. But you need to make sure the rules aren't going to change on you. So that I think some consistency would really be helpful in that regard. But that's, there's a lot to overcome, but I do think, I agree with you. There's a lot of water being wasted that we can reuse organically, especially in the cities with the stormwater. When I was on the LA Regional Water Quality Control Board, that was our biggest issue. But then you have the trash TMDLs to come over to work through and everything else. So, I'm really going to be watching this. So best of luck to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. You just mentioned stormwater. One of our Region 9 folks is going to be leading a big effort on stormwater convenings and how we can reduce those barriers to reusing stormwater. And because of COVID, of course, they couldn't have the big person convening, but they're going to be holding a series of workshops or webinars, I believe, over the next 6 months to a year, because they do hope to have the convening. Of course, will be pushed off hopefully till maybe next fall. But in the meantime, they're thinking, well, we could be gathering information, doing our homework, and better preparing for that workshop. So if you'd like to be included on those webinars, of course, please reach out to Rebecca and let me know, and I'll make sure that you can hear about them.
Oh, yes, definitely. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee?
Jamie, I'll ask one more. Sharon, there's a potential conflict in states with state water rights and reuse. And Colorado is a great example where you can't hold that water up. If you've got irrigation tailwater, stormwater, you cannot catch that water. It has to go on downstream. Have you talked or thought about how to resolve that potential?
Yeah, I think we've been somewhat silent on that issue. We've that's a complicated one. We haven't gotten our heads around, and we really don't have any comment on that at this point.
Okay.
We acknowledge it's there.
Barry, I see your hands up.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. Sharon, I've got a question for you. I've got a, for instance here, if we've got a lot of producers around our state that are implementing different things to reduce pollution and stuff in our surface waters, especially with feedlots, and they put in waste separation facilities and holding ponds, and then reuse that water through irrigation for their cropland. Is there a way that through this water reuse action plan or somewhere through rural development or somebody where we could maybe set something up to help those producers get those systems put in place or install the irrigation or some incentive to do that, to reuse that water?
I think that's kind of loaded. So, I think there's coming up with the best practices, and it depends on irrigating what, because I understand the FDA, of course, has or developing rules around irrigation water quality, right? So there's, what value do you need to meet? What are the best practices for, the holding times? What are the technologies? So understanding that is a piece. And then incentivizing it. One thing we're trying to do through the financial strategic theme is really highlight the eligibility of water reuse across our different federal programs. So like for us in the EPA, it's the WIFIA program, the state revolving funds, both for the Clean Water Act and the Drinking Water Act, that it can be reused for water, for reuse. USDA is doing the same thing, as I mentioned, those conservation innovation grants. So I think it's like a multi-pronged thing, like all of this in reuse is, but thinking about it from the, what's the fit for purpose? What's the technology and the best practices behind the technology? And then how can we incentivize, at least our federal funding programs, help promote this?
Jeanette?
Oh, thank you. One final question. I didn't want to hog your time there, Karen, but since no one else has a question. So I want to talk about data for a minute. So we're seeing some reports come out even in the food waste sector, which we'll talk about, I think, later today. But where they're taking, they're using this data and to fight climate change. They're sort of wanting to tell farmers what to grow, where to grow, when to grow, how to grow. And that concerns me because we're business people. That's our business. But I think the other thing is, we saw this in the drought in California, where they demonize certain type of crops, specifically almonds comes to mind. And so I'm concerned about the data, and I know we need the data to become more efficient and productive and everything else. And the precision ag tools we use makes it possible for us to do further conservation on our farms. But I am concerned about who gets a hold of the data and how it's used and how it's going to shape farming to come.
So because you're talking about almonds, I'm guessing you're talking about produced water in California. Yeah. Are you talking about produced water, oil and gas data?
Yeah, so well,
sometimes that type of water.
Well, it doesn't matter, any type of data. I mean, even I think they used when they came after almonds, they just went after the well data that was available for the almond growers, and they were specifically calling out individual almond growers in the Central Valley. So yeah, oil produced water is used on some of the nut crops, walnut, pistachios, some almonds, but yeah.
I mean, yeah, getting data, that's always just a huge obstacle for scientists. We always want more of it. So I don't know exactly how to answer your specific question on data for almonds, but, one thing this action plan is really trying to do, and the New Mexico Research Consortium is an example of that, is trying to bring lots of different scientists from, all over the United States and elsewhere together to put their heads together about how we can think about the research gaps and needs related specifically to produced water from oil and gas operations. And I do, from what I hear, there is just a huge data gap regarding, that source water, and just, it's very variable, and there's lots of different mixtures and chemicals within the water. So it's hard to get our heads around creating these risk assessments and doing it properly to help drive these fit for purpose specifications. So I can't speak specifically to the data on the almonds there, but I do understand that it's a big need.
Well, it's just a concern on how the data is going to be used, really. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Gore.
Hi, Sharon. That whole presentation was great. I think the best part of it is the collaboration and cooperation among a lot of different groups. But have y'all thought about, or is there any way to monitor possibly any effects from reuse? And what makes me think about that is I'm in Mississippi, and our farmers use both groundwater and surface water in different fields. And how they have to manage those fields varies depending on where they're getting their water from. So they may have, the source of the water may change the pH or may change how they have to fertilize that crop. So is there any monitoring efforts going on to see, as we start reusing water from different sources, what impacts that'll have on farmers?
That's a really great question. And I think, reuse is so different for every different region in the United States. And so, that's something that we're really trying to get our heads around, of how can we really listen to those regional differences and understand them, and then help address those regional needs. But I hear you that, you can do reuse, but then have an unintended consequence, like you're talking about pH change or whatever. So that's certainly something we're trying to be mindful of and hear, but we don't have a specific action necessarily related to that. And if you have any other advice or folks to get in contact on that point, that'd be appreciated.
Forgive me, I just see the name Brown up as a hand. I apologize.
Is that better? I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I guess I've just got a comment. Life goes on, doesn't it? You know, I can't help but think about your comment, Tom, where here in Colorado just recently allow people to have 2 rain barrels under their eaves. Prior to that, that was illegal. And now you can have 2 rain barrels. NRCS's guzzlers that we implemented on the CRP for providing water for pheasants were deemed illegal here in the state. And so consequently, the capture of any type of water, which appears to be surface or groundwater, and not allowing it to flow is going to be a monumental task here. And so I really appreciate your comments, Sharon, about the concept that this is going to be a very regional and state by statewide basis, but something that we need to look at. And thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I do not see any more hands. Going once. Well, Sharon, thank you for your time. Thank you for the presentation. Really, really appreciate it. Chairman, I'll yield back the rest of the time.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sharon. That was a very good presentation. So I think we're at the point in our agenda to just open up the discussion, and I've asked Jamie if he would to facilitate or lead this and talk about the water quality, water quantity issues, and potentially get into ideas for advice back to EPA. So we've got 45 minutes set aside, and I'll turn it over to Jamie to lead us through this discussion. Jamie?
Thank you, Chairman. I really want to take this time to have a discussion with the full committee to get input and perhaps reach consensus on the ad hoc group's recommendation on how we move forward with answering the charge. As you can see through just the 2 presentations, there's a lot of information to consider. There's a lot of learning to be done. It was news to know that there's yet another technical memo that was released last week. So Rebecca, before I forget, I'd like to ask you to get that and circulate it to the committee, please. So I want to go through again this list, and I'm going to give a little bit more detail, specifically around items 3 and 4, and about the discussions that we've had with the ad hoc group. So again, items 1 and 2, the first one was develop water quality trading framework. The second one is encourage additional collaboration with EPA, USDA, FDA, the state environmental agencies, and the ag agencies we should have on here on water reuse. And then the third one was use of voluntary efforts to provide certainty to farmers. And we had several topics within this one. So for instance, we feel like as an ad hoc group, we need more guidance from EPA to ensure that there's consistent interpretation of regulatory items such as waters of the United States. We had examples given where, for instance, during the original WOTUS rule, there were different agencies that had different interpretations of WOTUS. Also in here was an encouragement to have a rule on water reuse on ag lands. The third one under this topic again is nutrient management and conservation planning. How can farmers obtain certainty from EPA if they're following a voluntary program such as having a nutrient management plan or a conservation plan? And then another discussion that we had was around groundwater, specifically related to the Maui case in the Supreme Court. We need guidance on that from an agriculture perspective. And then we had 4 items underneath there: implications of water reuse in irrigation, kind of what definition of routine agriculture operations. We had conversations about tile drains and how that could potentially have impact on farmers, how that changes from surface water to groundwater potentially. And then there was another one on implications of underground injection program that potentially could be. I'm going to stop there because I just said a lot on the voluntary efforts and see what questions there might be or what discussions there might be on items 1 through 3. So we have water quality trading, we have the collaboration on water reuse that we just had the presentation on, and then use of voluntary efforts to provide certainty to farmers. So I'm going to stop there and see, because there's a lot in there. Again, if you would use the raise hand function, that would help me see who's in queue to ask a question. Emily?
Thank you so much, Jamie. And I'm so impressed with like how thoughtful and organized the water working groups recommendations are already. So I'm glad to see that. I'm curious on this third category that you were just describing. I'm glad you described it more because I was curious before when you were talking about like the, this voluntary efforts and but it seems like a lot of the stuff that you mentioned in there are regulatory. So they're less of their, I'm just trying to understand like how the group thought about calling those voluntary efforts. It seems like it's more guidance, like guidance from EPA on regulations that might impact, farmers or agricultural producers. So I just wanted to understand that a little more. That's my question.
Sure. So I think it falls more into the category of just providing certainty to farmers, period, not necessarily the voluntary efforts. But this category started broad and then we just, kept adding things to it. So, maybe we need to remove the voluntary efforts, or maybe we need to find a different word to put in there. But it's all about how can we advise EPA on providing additional certainty to farmers.
Got it. That's really helpful, and I think makes sense. And it does sound like there's a lot there, and that certainly like there's been a lot of evolution in the rules and then the court cases. So I completely endorse that. That's something that that we should be thinking about and working on. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you for the question. Ms. Lauren?
Hey, I'm looking at, again, I'm trying to take some notes and follow along, and I'm seeing it out of the list on number 3, a couple different points where it's not just EPA, but it's EPA and work with at least one other federal agency, if not multiple agencies at the state level. And I think that's where things start to get a little more complicated. So Waters of the U.S. was one of those. That's obviously the Army Corps, as well as at state level, multiple other agencies. And then also thinking about nutrient management and that voluntary setting at USDA and then carrying over. So it kind of, my thoughts are still kind of around that sub-cabinet level work and what we can do as a committee to encourage EPA to still show leadership there. I'm sure there are several on the committee who experience this feeling that, like at least in my setting, if I'm talking to EPA about what farmers have to do for perhaps on a livestock farm to our state agency, they have no idea what I'm saying when I start to talk about NRCS acronyms of conservation programs. But a farmer has a better awareness of those programs. So I still feel like after many decades of this work that there is still this breakdown in communication about what the farmers are doing to benefit the environment and how it's viewed within the federal EPA or even our state EPA lens. And so I think the more that we could do, I know it's not an easy task, but the more that we could do to push EPA to consider still working across those other sectors with some specificity, I think that could be beneficial.
So Lauren, would you suggest on that number 3 that we, at that point in time in that overall heading, include language that encourages multiple agency guidance on providing that certainty, or do you have any recommendations for how we would kind of title that number 3?
Yeah, I don't have the great words at the moment, but I think Emily is right. It is sort of a very long list of, some of it is regulatory, like even in the 2 examples that I mentioned, Waters of the U.S. is regulatory, and we still are seeing the maybe lack of consistency across the country and even at the state level. But over on the nutrient management side, that is something that a farmer would enter voluntarily. And if they were to take that voluntarily, maybe some assurances or certainty could be had on maybe future regulatory view. I can continue to think about it and maybe pull out a thesaurus and see what I can do, but just trying to unload my thoughts at the moment.
Thank you for doing so.
Jamie, this is Chris. Can I hop in on that point a little bit? Because again, this to me goes back to something very, very interesting that's tied to even the water quality credit trading decision earlier. And Lauren refers to the voluntary, which in the USDA programs it is pertinent. However, again, there's a cooperative federalism framework. For instance, in Florida, within BMAP areas and even arguably outside, there's no voluntary to it. There's you're implementing the best management practices that my program comes up with and articulates, or you are undertaking water quality monitoring to demonstrate that you're not causing or contributing to a violation of water quality standards. That's where the legislature in the state of Florida has gone, and we continue to look at ways to find flexibility and come up with those market mechanisms and programs under which we can operate. And it's interesting because our programs allow us to set that floor. What are the applicable BMPs that have to happen, and then you can go above and beyond that to those additional conservation measures that allows for really good development of either a market-based framework with credit trading or that type of framework that exists when we can come up with these are the public goods and environmental services that we can come up with payment platforms for. So the dispersed water storage, water farming type of a piece. So it's interesting to me in that there is going to be various interactions between EPA and the state governments. But also even within these broader contexts, how do you tie some of the EPA regulatory programs to the type of stuff that's coming out of USDA, NRCS? I mean, obviously, this is where this committee can be very, very impactful, even in situations where, again, even waters of the state could have a different definition. I know in Florida, waters of the state is actually broader, more encompassing than even the Obama era rule was. So I think EPA is going to have a very interesting challenge in recognizing that cooperative federalism framework at the same time as you're talking in these generalized levels as to what those common goals are that we're trying to accomplish.
Jimmy Kinder?
I'll just kind of add on to that. I kind of totally agree. Out here in the country, among farmers, among land managers, there is a distrust of the agency. Just I'll put it bluntly. That's just where it is out there. But we do have a pretty good working relation with the USDA and our NRCS specifically. And I just would think that to do anything, you're going to have to get these land managers to get on board. And I think that going through the USDA would be a great opportunity for the EPA to, with their regulations and their science to help NRCS get to a program that has the best management practices and maybe implement it not through PA or from either state agency. Of course, I'm just talking from Oklahoma, but NRCS has a good working relationship with most farmers, and we do feel like that we can kind of trust them, and we don't feel like going down the road that the rules are going to change a whole lot, and we can work something around that. And that's kind of what I'm feeling here in Oklahoma, and I'm talked to a lot of farmers from all across the nation, and I think that specifically the next 4 years could be interesting.
Thank you for that. Jeanette?
Yes. So I agree with Laura in regards to the agencies, but maybe Beth can weigh in this too, because sometimes I think it's the NGOs that I have the biggest concern about here in California. For example, one that actually owns a lot of land in California as the Nature Conservancy, and when we just went through the Sustainable Groundwater Act process and had to come up with our plans for our basins, they stepped in and connected the surface water with the groundwater by something called groundwater dependent ecosystems. And what they basically said is that there's these ecological communities of species that depend on groundwater for survival. And if we take too much of the surface water, it doesn't go into the groundwater, so they're wanting to keep the water in the rivers. And these species are both plants and animals. So, there's this, there's first this connection of the surface water and groundwater, and regulatorily who controls what. And then secondly, there's the this whole concept of losing more water to the endangered species. And here in California, that means just watching it go out to the ocean. So there's those are the two things that, because they went and did this comprehensive analysis and mapping unique ecosystems. And so I have concerns, if you're a farmer and you're wanting some consistency, and to do a business plan for the next 3 years, water is a major input that you have to account for, and you have these things come out of left field. So it's like, how do we manage that?
So you were referring to me, Jeanette, and this is Beth,
Yep.
just because I work for an NGO, right, and representing. So, I mean, I think to me, the most important thing is probably to just have these, do multi-stakeholder approaches and make sure that the NGOs are in there from the get-go. So hopefully something's not coming out of left field. It's coming in at the beginning, the concerns come in at the beginning of a conversation.
But it seems like no matter how much outreach you do and bring people in, there's issues with, there's always somebody out there that comes in on the 11th hour and throws a grenade, right? It's sort of like nonprofits. There's like so many of them. So I think that's where, how do you get the consistency that we need? That's really what it comes down to.
I guess I think back to my time working for private industry, and I guess one could say maybe similar things happened, and maybe sort of companies realize that they're not going to be able to please everybody. No matter what you do on a certain front, there's going to be some outliers on any side, and you have to decide how much risk you're willing to take, and therefore how far your appeasement goes. Because I mean, I don't know that I see it as just an NGO issue. In a way, it's human nature, right? It's like any conversation, you get together and someone's spacing out, and then suddenly they engage, and you're like, well, why the heck didn't you say that when we first started? Why are you? So I don't know how to prevent that. I think stakeholder groups have to just be willing to really evaluate the voices that come in the ninth inning and see if this is one we're going to listen to and act on, or are we going to just hold it in abeyance for a while you wait to see if there's more research or more information available.
Thank you, Beth. I didn't mean to call you out, but I knew you were an NGO representative, so I had to.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair, Jeanette. It's fine.
And I have found that if you focus on the things you can agree on, you can get more done, and you can just put the things you don't agree on in the parking lot. That's my 2 cents. Barry, you're up next.
Okay, I'm just going to expound on Jimmy's talk there and a little bit on Jeanette and Beth's as well. I'll finish up with that. But our relationship up here with producers and NRCS, it's kind of weird. I'm on the fence about it. It doesn't seem like it's a super great relationship, depending on which ones you talk to or whatever. But as far as innovation and doing these nuances with our programs or BMPs or anything that we work with producers through the watershed projects, where we run into a barrier is if we try to do something innovative, but yet there's a standard and a specification written by NRCS that doesn't allow for us to change and do that new innovation, then we're stuck. We can't do it. And with those old standards and specs, we've got some things that we're so far advanced that they haven't kept up with them, that we got to hire an engineer, as Jeanette said before. And we got to hire another engineer to watch that engineer. So then we got a TSP that's watched by an engineer to develop something, and then it starts costing a lot of money just to get to a point where the guy could have said, well, I can get a screwdriver and a ratchet set and do what I need to do. And it'll work because it's there. But that's where we fall short of the great ideas and getting it all wrapped up in some of these old standards and specs that we have to try to follow. And that's predetermined by some of these old rules. Now, the stakeholders and the stuff you guys, Jeanette and Beth, that you're talking about, getting them involved, as far as what I've seen for successes up here, those guys that they might be a member of corn growers, they might be a member of wheat growers, they might be whatever, some other groups, commodity groups that they're members of, but they're also producers is what I'd like to see, to work with those guys. And I've set up little subcommittees with those producers that are actually actively farming. Maybe not necessarily somebody that's on one of those committees, but somebody that actually farms. And it seems like I've gotten the best feedback from those individuals that are actually out there doing it, and they're current with what's going on. So I feel the stakeholders that really have mattered in what we're doing here are the ones that are actively farming and engaged in doing the stuff that we're doing currently. And that's where I get my best feedback from. So,
Lauren, your hand was up and then it's back down, it looks like. I just want to give you the opportunity.
Yeah, I probably don't have a fully formed thought, but which is why I kind of took it down. But I will say that I'm kind of thinking about Jeanette's comment of, as we think about certainty, and she said the word, I forget what word you used, Jeanette, wasn't certainty, but consistency or something, and the role of NGOs. And I think really, I think all of us do in various ways at the state level, at the local level, or even at the federal level, try to gather diverse viewpoints around a table and chew at some of these issues, water quality being a main one that many of us have been engaged in, whether you're coming from the livestock perspective or row crop or a combination thereof. But I think the real difference is not just the 11th hour, but the third party potential for a lawsuit to change the game. So we can be talking forever in a very collaborative way, but a lot of the laws that exist that the EPA is working under actually do provide that third party appeal rights, whether we're talking permits and things like that. So, I think there's a big disconnect between, individual producers working proactively, innovatively, and as a partnership at a county level, a watershed level, and then something happening in the court system that just derails everything. And it takes a lot of resources to fight that, and those resources leave the ag space from innovation, and they turn toward, defensive lawsuits. So that, to me, is probably the last place that we want to go. We want to create, an atmosphere where farmers can continue to innovate without that fear. So I'm not dissing the attorneys in the world, but I think it is a reality that does actually harm a lot of the progress in the ag space.
Dave Grable.
Yeah, here in central Pennsylvania, small dairy farmer, and we have a whole lot more water running out of the ground than I hear you guys talking about out west. But one of the things that I think that all farmers look at, because I do it, and if I'm talking to NRCS and I'm talking about a CSP contract or something like that, I like the thought that was already given. We look for stability. In other words, I want to see in that 3-year contract, that 5-year contract, whatever it is, that it's going to be profitable at the end of the contract for the farm. Because if it's not, I don't want it. And anything we do with enhancing water quality here on the farm has to be economical to the farm. Otherwise, I'm not farming. And every farmer out there knows that. So when we're talking about what we can do here, recommending water quality to people, you have to keep that in your mind. We have to have a profit. We're not a government agency that can demand money. We have to take the price for whatever we're producing. We're not setting that price necessarily. We're producing it, and the consumer's buying it at their price.
Thank you.
Jamie, maybe it'd be helpful to just ask the group, what are the issues around which you would like to have certainty? I think we're talking about all the ways that certainty is hard to get at. What are the key issues? I'll throw out one that's near and dear to my heart, and that's nutrient management. And we all know that there's no such thing as an accounting system in a biological setting. And so 1 + 1 does not always equal 2. And those kind of things are really hard to manage in a regulatory system. And I work for CAFOs, and we've got the NPDES permits and nutrient management plans and so forth. But that issue of certainty around, if I manage my nutrients according to whatever the program is, NRCS Code 590, as long as I'm managing my nutrients to that standard, then I'm okay. And I guess I'd look to some of the other producers in the committee. What is it that you're nervous about, or you would like to have regulatory certainty? If I do this, in this way, I'm okay.
Dave Grable.
Dave, you're on mute.
Yeah, I don't know if I can really answer that for you, Tom. One of the other things I thought about was you know, we have a farm bill every 5 years, and the things that come down out in that farm bill give us a certain amount of security because those monies now have been allocated through the federal government. So we know those programs are going to be consistent. And to your point on nutrient management, I don't, you know, I have a nutrient management plan, and I have to follow it. But is it always what I look at? There are so many things. We write a nutrient management plan, and as you said, 1 + 1 don't always equal 2. The weather is going to decide what is going to happen. So whenever I'm looking at those plans and it rains too much, like in 2018, then what would work on that plan will not work. So I have to make a change. Or this year, whenever we were dry, those things make a difference, and you have to change your current management, this day-to-day management. You're not changing the plan. You're not changing the plan, the nutrient management plan, but you're changing your day-to-day management. And I think every producer out there is going to be able to say the same thing.
Jimmy Kinder.
I don't know if I have a complete thought either, but I think that what makes a difference out here to land stewards and producers is you feel like that you've got a partnership with the agency, and the agency's there to help you succeed and not try to be regulatory and punitive. And if, you know, it all becomes down to relationships a lot of times down here on the farm, that person that's on the ground that's working side by side with you and trying to help you succeed. It really depends on their attitude, whether or not, that program is successful or not. And, you know, these guys, they control a lot of acres. They've got to control a lot of resources out here. And we're just very hesitant to raise your hand and say, yes, I could be a point source of a problem here. And if you don't know the answer to that question before you raise your hand, you're just very reluctant to raise that hand. So it's going to have to come down to relationships, continuity of programs. Somebody said 3 years. I'd like to say 10 years, because if I do something now, is it going to come back and bite me 10 years from now? And so that's where we're kind of what we're looking at in the way we think. Thank you.
Emily.
Thank you. I think just wanted to pull a point that I think Dave made, which was just about the farm bill, and that there is this certainty kind of with every 5 years, and even if there's changes in every farm bill, that it provides a level of certainty. And I'm wondering if something like that is a way to think about some of these issues as well. And it's not a fully formed idea at this point, but just that maybe it is, it feels like right now there'll be a new rule or regulation. There'll be like a lot of back and forth with like litigation about it, et cetera. And I wonder if there's something where the, if farmers at least had a 5-year window knowing they could plan around that would be enough certainty, even if it was clear that there might be changes after that. I'm not sure how we would apply that with some of these regulations, but it seems like the only thing we know in life is that there's going to be change and things are going to change. And it feels like if we know that, we can kind of come to an agreement about some of these regulations for that amount of time, knowing that in 5 years there'll be a chance to revisit them. I don't know. I don't know if there's a way to kind of work that into any recommendations that we might have.
Rebecca is pinging me saying that Gary Mahoney's trying to ask a question.
Gary, you're on mute. Hey, Gary, you're muted. Can you take the mute off?
Is that better?
There you go. Yes, sir.
Sorry about that. We have a lot of muck land. 1,000 years ago, it was a lake, and we have side ditches that are drainage ditches, and there's usually water in them year round. And the previous waters of the U.S. said that if you were going to apply products on, over, or near water, you had to have a permit, federal permit. Nobody ever defined near. Is it a quarter of an inch? Is it a half a mile? Nobody ever defined it. So, these regulations, there needs to be some certainty that if you're within a foot or a yard, then you need the permit. But if you're farther away than that, you don't.
Good point.
Don Brown.
Thank you very much. Enjoying the dialogue. I guess as a producer, and I'm reaching back to where you were, Tom, when you mentioned the producer component of it. Here in the arid West, we have a lot of federal land. A lot of our states are owned anywhere from 36% to 90-some% by the feds. And BLM and Forest Service agreements typically run 10 years. And those agreements have a tendency to change. And what we find is that people, the young people don't come back to the farms and ranches because 10 years sounds like a long time till it isn't. And if you want to devote your career to it, oh my, that's what we experience. The second thing I think we're experiencing everywhere in the United States is the rules and regulations and the tendency for the agencies to make an example out of somebody forces everyone to lawyer up. And lawyering up is an expensive thing. And so by the long term, what happens is rules and regulations truly drive out where everyone's focus seems to be, the young producers and the small producers. By one hand, we're saying one thing, we want to help you. And on the other hand, we're putting rules and regs in place so that you need a stable of lawyers to defend yourself. And so consequently, I think that there's several things we need to look at here, but one of them certainly would be the length of some type of program and exemptions from the new components which come down the pike. A lot of these take a large financial investment, and then, oh my, in 3 to 5 years, that's no longer adequate. So people leave the businesses and the big ones get bigger. Thank you.
Yes. Michael Crowder.
Thank you, Jamie. I wanted to come back to what Jimmy and Barry and Bill were saying earlier about interactions with other federal agencies, and I'm referring to the FPAC and specifically the NRCS and the trust that producers generally have. I heard Barry earlier, but I found that a lot of work across the U.S. NRCS has a high reputation with producers, and I was talking to Acting Chief Kevin Norton yesterday specifically on this, and he felt that EPA and FPAC had a good relationship. I forget the name. I believe it is David Ross with EPA. That might be wrong, but it's Undersecretary Northey with FPAC. And I just encourage strong relationships, and if the one thing that I could get out the most is the relationships of the carrot and the stick. The BMPs might change and likely will change over the years, but if farmers have certainty that the practice that they're doing now, according to a best management practice, will satisfy until a certain period of time. And I don't remember who said it earlier, but it has to be profitable for the producer. If it's doing a common good for society, there should be cost share for that, and we support that. So thank you.
Thank you. Barry Berg.
Yeah, and I'm commenting on Dave when Dave was looking for, an issue of certainty. Dave, I think you hit it on the head when you said, in your other talk about the bottom line. I mean, it has to be sustainable and it has to be profitable. If you don't make a profit, then what good is it? So that's one thing that these programs or things have to have is a sustainability aspect, and then, a good bottom line or a bottom line that you can live with. The other thing, Michael, you just touched on it. With the issue of the different programs out there, really, the thing that a lot of guys have problems with is if the program changes partway into the contract and then they've got to come up with they've got to meet some new requirements of it. And that wasn't necessarily discussed when they signed the contract for a 10-year project. So it's tough to change. Or if they sign up for a different type of program, and I don't know who was talking about it, but if a drought happens or if you get some crazy rainstorm or something weird happens and you just can't get it done, or you can't do it the way that whatever program they're going into, if it's cover crops or, some CSP program, that it just doesn't happen for that year. So then you're out of compliance. And why are you out of compliance? Because Mother Nature in your neck of the woods really didn't allow for you to do it. But down the road 15 miles, you just didn't get that gully washer that affected you so much. So you can do it. And they just say, well, that producer did it. Why didn't you do it? Well, this producer couldn't do it. And so then he's in violation of his contract, and that scares guys. And that's where they go away from, the certainty stuff. And it's hard to do business that way. And so a lot of customers get fed up and look for something else and stuff. So it's difficult to do it that way. I like to use a little more what I call common sense with guys. And if there's some things that happen with the watershed project and producers, and it's a act of Mother Nature that is a little more difficult to do something, we have some wiggle room, but there should be a little more wiggle room too with this to give a little more certainty towards these things.
Yeah.
So
I'm
sorry. Oh, so Tom, to answer your question, I have to put on my banker hat and talk about there's 8 business risks in agriculture. So the first is production risk. And what that is anytime there's a variation in your dollar return due to variations in the quality of output. So for example, here in California, we have chlorides in our water. So now I got to flush the root zone every time I water. And, or I get tree crops that have tip burn on them. Okay, price risk. We've all talked about that. The price of water, the price of technology, the price of legal. The second is your casualty risk. So, it's your age of your infrastructure, which is crumbling out here in California. It's quagga mussels, for example. In irrigation, they'll just destroy it. So there's that casualty risk. There's a human risk. So the human risk right now, what we're dealing with is we're like was pointed out to us at our very first meeting, we're losing the water technicians for our irrigation districts, or they don't have the level of knowledge they need to keep up with the innovation. The legal risks, we all know all too well. Political risks, it's whatever's on the agenda and it's constantly changing. So now it's climate change. What is it going to be next? Now, how do you protect yourself for that? The other thing is economic risks. We're coming out of we're in a national recession, could head to a depression, so that's one of the risks. And then the obsolescent risk. So, we can get technology today that we think is great, and then a regulatory thing could come like we saw with our some of our engines out here on our tractors, right? And next thing you know, you got to replace every tractor, replace every engine, or put on a catalytic converter or whatever you have to do, because now it's outdated. So to me, if I want some certainties, some of those, or most of those 8 things somehow have to be addressed, so that it's at least, there's a risk to everything, and everybody has different tolerance for risk. But I think, for us to have a stable agricultural sector that is going to feed America, with less farmers, less water, and more people, those are what we have to come to grips with somehow. Sorry, that was too long, but.
So we have about 5 minutes left. I wanted to go through real quick, mention 4 and 5. And so the number 4 is addressing impaired waters. And that includes, the listing and delisting process, streamlining of processes, and including greater agency interaction, education of small communities and their community leaders on regulations, regional-based water quality and quantity plans to address region-specific differences. And then Jeanette's really, you can hear her, the importance of innovation implementation. You can hear her, she's talked about that a couple of times. So, and then the fifth one is carbon sequestration and soil health. So a carbon trading framework that is really similar to item number one, but we wanted to leave that specific to soil health. So I want to take the last 5 minutes and just make sure of those 5 greater areas, make sure we have consensus, make sure there's nobody on the committee that says, I disagree or there should be a different one. That's one. And then 2, I want to say, as we move on to another topic here in a little bit, and maybe we go on a few other days, Tom hit on it. What are the programs or what are the regulations that from a producer's perspective, we feel like we need more certainty on? And I would encourage everyone that if you come up with something, to email Tom and I and just let us know. Do not suggest everybody reply to all, so to speak, but email Tom and I directly and we'll add it to the list. So I'll stop and see if we've got some consensus on how the water group moves forward, and then close us out. Emily?
Just to endorse these final 2 topics, especially the last one on carbon sequestration, because it seems like that's being talked about more and more. So kind of getting ahead of it. And, I agree it relates to the first one. And then regarding the first topic on your list, which we didn't talk about that much, but, and it's something I don't know as much about. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn with all of you, but just listening to the conversation from the first presentation today, it sounds like there's still like a lot of interest and a lot of questions on that. So I think I'm glad that, that we'll be working as a group to give some recommendations there. And it just felt like if there's in all different parts of the country, really, the questions might be unique, but there are questions of how to do this, that I think there must be some recommendations and things that could be done at the agency level to make that easier. And I was just looking, and it looked like there is a toolkit that EPA had for around this water quality trading, but it's sort of outdated. And so maybe like just as a start, since they've now put some updates on that, at least putting things out that say, and even just with the expertise in this group, like present party excluded, because I'm not bringing that expertise, but just here's the kind of questions that we had to answer, and almost like enumerating those, and then having EPA kind of write that up to say, here are the common issues and here's some of the ways to successfully navigate those, would just at the bare minimum seem like it would have a lot of impact based on the comments that this group made.
Emily, I think you went on mute prematurely.
Sorry.
Emily?
That's weird. I don't know where I cut off, but I said just that it seems like even a small, it could be a small step towards addressing the kinds of questions that were raised here, and that I imagine others would have to, just based on the conversation today.
Thank you. Amy Wolf?
I want to echo Emily's comments. I actually appreciate, because I feel like she captured what my sentiment was going to be as well. As someone who has what I would consider a strong peripheral knowledge and understanding of the water issues that are affecting our producers, I, number one, appreciate the guest speakers from today who provided extensive and incredibly helpful information for someone like myself, where this is not my area of expertise. Number two, I do feel like the 5 areas that the work group has identified are on point. And I almost feel like we're going to have this problem with each of our areas of emphasis that we've been tasked with. There's so much that can be done it's almost like there's a million rabbit holes we could go down. And so my one observation is making sure that we, that as working groups, we do our best to stay on point, because I do think it's going to become easy for us to have side issues of a side issue that we need to manage. And one thing that I took away is, again, I feel more like an observer to this issue, since this is not my area of expertise, is it is clear to me that maintaining producers' perspective on how these issues, as well as how solutions impact them, and having that diverse perspective across our states, our tribes, our territories, I think is actually going to be essential and should potentially become an area that when we find ourselves straying in topic or straying in focus, that we use that as the thing that brings us back to center. Because I do fear to some extent that we have the potential to get off track, and not because there isn't good reason for it, but because these issues are so multifaceted and so complicated that it's going to be an important element to remember as we continue to move forward. But I fully support the 5 sub areas that the work group has identified. And again, I'm incredibly appreciative of our guest speakers today in helping someone like myself have a better understanding of these issues.
Thank you, Amy. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you. It's the time.
Jamie, thank you. Your timing is impeccable. So I feel like Amy did a good job for the wrap of this session. We did have good discussion. Our speakers were incredibly well-versed and certainly gave us a lot more information to consider. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and start the food loss and food waste topic. So with that, we're going to take a 15-minute break, be back at the top of the hour. That would be 3 o'clock Eastern time. So for 15 minutes, we're on break. Thank you.